Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Snoozy Scientist, where we wander softly through the mysteries of science, one sleepy yawn at a time. Whether you're listening from beneath a warm blanket, settling into the stillness of the night, or letting your thoughts float in that quiet space between waking and sleep, you're exactly where you need to be. Tonight, we're leaving the safety of the surface behind, slipping beneath the sunlit waves into a realm older than human memory, where the boundary between myth and reality has always been at its thinnest. For as long as humans have sailed the open sea, they have returned with stories too strange to believe. Ancient sailors told tales of shadows that moved beneath the waves like living continents, of whirlpools that rose from nowhere, pulling ships into blackness, of eyes, vast, unblinking, watching from the depths, as if the ocean itself were alive. Roman historians wrote of ships that vanished in calm waters, swallowed whole without a cry. Inuit hunters spoke of silent shapes beneath the ice, drifting closer each season, too large, too deliberate to be anything but alive. For centuries, these stories have been dismissed as superstition, the fearful inventions of men too long at sea. But the deeper scientists peer into the abyss, the more unsettling the truth becomes. Many of these so called monsters were not born from imagination, they were glimpses, brief, distorted, but real, of creatures that once prowled the oceans. Some still do, and many were far more extraordinary than the myths ever dared to describe. The ocean is not just a body of water, it is Earth's oldest memory, a place older than mountains and deeper than human understanding. It covers more than 70% of our planet, and over 80% of it remains unexplored. In its cold and crushing dark, life has grown into forms so powerful, so alien, that old stories no longer feel like fantasy, but like memories of encounters humanity was never meant to forget. Which leaves us with a haunting question. If so many myths turned out to be real, then what else is still waiting in the dark? Tonight, we'll dive gently into this last great wilderness of our planet. We'll trace the thin line between memory and myth, between fear and fact, and perhaps by the time we resurface, we'll find that the legends we once dismissed weren't legends at all, but history. But before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there? Your comments are one of my favorite parts of this sleepy little community. If you're enjoying these late night explorations, a like and a subscribe would mean a lot. And for those already subscribed, thank you for being part of this calm little corner of science. If you haven't yet, kindly tap the notification bell so you won't miss the next upload. And here's a small joke to ease us in. Hopefully, this story won't be so fascinating that it keeps you awake all night. But if they do, at least you'll slip into tomorrow with a head full of knowledge. Now take a slow, deep breath, let your shoulders relax, and together, let's slip beneath the waves. For as long as humans have set sail on the open sea, they have carried with them more than supplies and navigation tools. They have carried fear. It travels silently aboard every vessel, tucked into the corners of every mind that has ever looked out at a horizon where water meets sky and seen nothing else in any direction. Fear is born from the unknown, and nowhere has the unknown loomed larger than on the endless shifting face of the ocean. The first thing the ocean takes is certainty. A hull leaves the harbor, the shoreline slips behind the stern, and the world becomes a moving plain of water with no landmarks and no fixed path. On a small wooden vessel, the deck shifts underfoot, the rigging hums with changing wind, and the horizon draws a perfect circle that refuses to break. There is no trail to follow out here, only the quiet tick of the log line, the pull of the compass, and the long wait between stars. In that wide and shifting emptiness, thoughts stretch to fill the space. The mind starts to search for shapes where none are given. Nights at sea are long, cloud cover swallows constellations. The lamp in the binnacle throws a narrow pool of light that fades a few strides away. Beyond it, the water is a field of moving black. Sounds travel oddly over the surface. A groan of timber answers a wave you never saw. A distant splash reaches the rail as a single hollow note with no source. Sightline cues are scarce. When a swell lifts the stern, the line between sea and sky blurs, then redraws itself in a slightly different place. It is a setting that invites patterns, and a human brain is quick to accept the invitation. Sailors lived with that invitation for weeks at a time. Watches blended into one another. Meals arrived with the bell, then were cleared away to make room for coils of line and damp charts. On calm days, the ocean looked like metal, faint ripples running under a moving mirror. On windy days, it chopped itself into ranks of gray. Either way, it offered only glimpses. A dark back rose and vanished before eyes adjusted. A line of waves marched in a way that seemed too orderly for water. A blunt shape drifted just below the surface and never broke it. There was always just enough information to begin a story and never enough to finish one. Stories are a way of putting handles on the unknown. At sea, they moved from mouth to mouth, stitched into the fabric of a voyage as surely as the seams in a sail. A helmsman repeated something heard in a northern port. A deckhand from another coast added a detail learned from his grandfather. A mate copied a line into a log because it was the neatest way to mark a moment he did not know how to quantify. Oral tradition is rarely a single voice. It is a chorus, and on the water the chorus grew with every landfall and every departure. The ocean itself encouraged embellishment without any trickery of intent. Surface light can make a shoal of small fish appear as a single body moving with one will. Long, even swells can lift and lower a length of seaweed until it seems to ripple like muscle. Low fog can pull a distant object off the surface and suspend it in air. Heat layers can bend sightlines so a ship rides above its reflection and looks twice its height. None of this is deceitful. It is simply how water and air behave across long distances with few reference points. When the world edits what you can see, a story becomes a way to restore a full picture. Monotony had its own influence. A crew that had watched the same stretch of water all day was ready to catch at anything that changed. The mind will complete a shape when only a part of it is presented, and the sea offers many parts. 2 or 3 curves in quick succession can suggest a single long body that is not actually there. A splash and then a second splash, separated by a few heartbeats, can feel like the rise and fall of one enormous creature. An arc of spray can mark a place where nothing remains by the time a boat can reach it. A name given to such moments, exchanged on a quarterdeck or in a harbor tavern, gave them weight and made them easy to pass along. Distance carried those names farther than charts ever did. A carpenter from a southern coast shipped north for a season and took home a tale he had not brought with him. A navigator who had seen only warm seas listened hard in a cold water port and copied unfamiliar words into his notebook. In this way, a description that began as a brief encounter in one latitude could arrive years later in another, polished by retellings until it sat comfortably in a different language and a different weather. The ocean was a road that ran both ways for cargo and for story. There were social reasons to keep such tales alive. A frightening moment explained becomes a tool. A captain could use it to set custom along a dangerous channel. A parent could use it to mark the difference between respect for water and recklessness near it. A pilot could use it to hold the attention of an exhausted crew at the end of a watch change. Warnings that rhyme are easy to remember. Descriptions that enlarge a thing are hard to forget. The practical wrapped itself in the memorable, and the memorable persisted. Map makers added their own thread. Blank water can look careless on a page, so margins filled with inked creatures and cautious notes. The illustrations told readers what words could not, that beyond a certain degree The sea knew its own business and would share it only grudgingly. Even when an image was fanciful, it recorded a truth about navigation that was neither romantic nor exaggerated. There were places where soundings ran strange, where currents did not match expectation, where sightings did not yield identifications. With no firm way to fix those pockets of uncertainty, pen and imagination marked them for memory. None of this requires malice or gullibility. It requires only a landscape that refuses to hold still, and a species that is built to make sense of movement. A handful of glimpses becomes a shape, because shapes are how we organize the world. A name gathers moss because names let us carry a thing from one mind to another. A tale grows because each teller thinks he is only filling a small gap, smoothing a crease, giving an image its proper size. Little by little, the unknown acquires a body and a habit, then a reputation. By the time a ship beat back to its home river, the tale that left with it had changed. It wore the weather of the voyage and the accents of the ports where it had rested. It had become easier to tell and harder to dislodge. Over years, the same process worked on dozens of small reports until they formed a pattern strong enough to persist without any single eyewitness to support it. That is how monsters are born in the unknown, not in a single burst of invention, but in the steady pressure of water against wood, of watch against watch, of glimpse against guess. Some sailors even wrote of islands that moved. In northern waters, they gave it a name. Long before charts were crowded with soundings and lights, sailors wrote of shapes that rose where no land should be. In northern waters, a calm sea might heave in a slow swell, a circle of slick water widening, as if something vast were testing the surface from below. Men at the rail watched what looked like a low island gather itself and lift. Weed clung to it. Foam broke around its rim. Then the shape sank again, leaving a whirl that tugged at anything too near. In the telling, anchors were lost, boats spun, timbers creaked, and the sea settled back as if nothing had happened. These stories traveled easily. A pilot from the Skagerrak brought one into a Baltic port. A fisherman from a fjord repeated another in a Shetland tavern. The details changed with the weather and the language, but the core remained steady. There was talk of many armed branches rising like the roots of a great tree. There were cautions about still days when the sea seemed to breathe. A bishop of Norway in the 18th century wrote that a creature could be mistaken for an island, and that its sudden descent might leave a great boiling hole. Elsewhere, a captain copied a steadier account into his log, making room for the extraordinary beside the ordinary list of wind, course, and position. On land, men with books and cabinets were less persuaded. The age of reason asked for specimens and measurements. A moving island did not fit either. Naturalists proposed that floating mats of seaweed might appear solid from a distance. Schools of fish, they said, could confuse the eye and look like a single body. Some argued that fatigue and poor visibility were enough to conjure a monster out of ordinary water. Even among sailors, the sensible voices advised that a patch of calm within rough water is not always a sign of life. It can come from current lines, temperature layers, or oil washed from a galley barrel. Yet the sea left marks that arguments could not erase. Whalers brought the first of them home. When a sperm whale was cut in, its skin sometimes showed circular scars, each a ring of small pits, each ring nested with others along the flank. Harpoon dents did not look like that. Teeth from other whales did not leave them. The scars were too neat, too orderly, as if a row of cups had clamped and released with force. Crews who had worked at the edge of darkness told what they thought those rings meant. Deep below, beyond the last drop of daylight, something with powerful suckers had found the same prey the whalers sought, and had taken hold. From time to time, the sea offered pieces of the puzzle to shorelines that would listen. After heavy weather, long pale strips came ashore, soft and frayed, lined with circles that matched the scars on whale skin. In the 19th century, Along cold Atlantic coasts, there were occasions when an entire carcass, already breaking down, washed onto a beach. The shape was hard to keep, the sea having taken much of it back, but the parts that remained carried clues that could be measured. A line of suckers still ringed a length of arm. A beak of hard chitin emerged from jelly, dark and hooked, unmistakable even when the rest had gone to pulp. Fishermen hauled up pieces in their nets and brought them to men who weighed and wrote and drew. None of this settled the matter in a single stroke. The ocean seldom grants that kind of neat conclusion. A ring of scars is evidence of contact, not of a body on a table. A rotting limb on a tide line is proof of a creature, but not of its habits, its full size, or its reach. Some remains that prompted headlines turned out on closer look to be tissue from whales, altered by decay into strange forms. But other finds held, and they began to form a chain of signs that pointed in one direction. There were giants in the deep that did not breathe air. They came to pieces under waves in ways that matched cephalopods, not fish or mammals. Their parts matched the marks on whales that fed far below. Skeptical minds adjusted slowly. Museum drawers made room for unfamiliar beaks. Anatomists traced the layout of muscle and sucker from those pale strips and confirmed an arrangement distinct from smaller coastal species. Charts that had once warned only with rumor now carried tiny notes of fact. The very language of the stories shifted, less island and more animal, less myth and more evidence, though the animal behind those fragments remained invisible in its own world. The old name did not vanish. It clung to the edges of maps and to the corners of conversations, because names hold stories together. When a lookout shouted that the sea looked odd, when a helmsman felt a lift beneath the rudder that did not match the wind, a familiar word gave the moment shape. That word carried with it the memory of logbook lines and dockside explanations, of scars counted along a whale's flank, of a beak black as a wet stone laid on a table under a window with poor light. A thing need not be seen whole to be given a place in a mind. Only in recent years would cameras meet the animal behind the story. Until then, the evidence for a many-armed hunter lived in marks on other giants, in limbs that came ashore, and in the careful notes of people who studied what could be held. In that patient way, the ocean allowed one of its rumors to become a record. How that record grows and what shape the living creature keeps in the dark belongs ahead. Myths traveled, and some entered scripture with a different name. Long before science gave names to the giants of the sea, humans tried to capture their essence in stories. The ocean was not just water stretching beyond the horizon, it was a living force, unpredictable and immense, and in its depths people imagined beings that embodied power itself. Among these imagined titans, one name carried across centuries and languages: Leviathan. The earliest written descriptions of Leviathan appear in some of humanity's most ancient texts. In the book of Job, it is not presented as a simple beast, but as a living storm. Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook? The author asks before describing a creature that cannot be controlled or defeated. Its back is said to be covered in shields, its teeth flashing like rows of swords. Its breath, the writer claims, can make the sea boil, and its eyes glow like the first light of dawn. These are not the words of a fisherman describing a catch. They are the words of a civilization struggling to describe something beyond its power. Similar figures appear again and again across the ancient Near East. In Ugaritic texts, the storm god Baal must battle a multi-headed sea serpent called Lotan. In Babylonian creation stories, the chaos goddess Tiamat is portrayed as a monstrous embodiment of the primordial sea, defeated only by the god Marduk. Even the seafaring Phoenicians who built their lives around the tides spoke of creatures so vast that they churned the sea into foam. Though the names changed, they all described the same thing: a colossal predator of the deep that no human force could master. For much of recorded history, scholars and naturalists dismissed these stories as metaphor. Leviathan, they argued, was not a real animal, but a poetic symbol for the untamable power of nature. Some believed it might refer to a crocodile or a large fish. Others suggested it was an exaggerated account of a whale, described by people who had never seen one up close. Whatever the explanation, the image of Leviathan as a powerful hunter remained constant, even as interpretations shifted over the centuries. Then, in the deserts of southern Peru in the early 2000s, a discovery changed how scientists thought about such myths. There, paleontologists uncovered the fossilized skull of a whale, unlike any known before. The skull was more than 10 feet long, its jaws heavy and muscular, and embedded within them were teeth nearly 14 inches from base to tip. They were thick, conical, and deeply rooted, designed not for filtering plankton, but for gripping and tearing through flesh. This was no filter feeder drifting through the water. This was a predator built for combat. Scientists named it Leviathan Melville, honoring both the biblical creature and Herman Melville, author of Moby Dick. Leviathan lived roughly 12 to 13 million years ago, during the Miocene epoch, when the seas were rich with large marine mammals. It was a toothed whale, likely over 50 feet in length, and its closest living relative is the modern sperm whale. But unlike the sperm whale, which feeds mostly on squid, Leviathan was a hunter of other whales. Its jaws could crush bone. Its bite force would have been immense, and its teeth were the largest of any known predator. This Leviathan was no serpent at all, but a mammal with teeth like chisels, built to tear into prey nearly its own size. The discovery of Leviathan revealed a world that once existed beneath Miocene seas, a world where apex predators clashed in violent encounters far larger than anything we see today. It likely shared the oceans with the giant shark Carchariclus, megalodon, a fish that may have grown to more than 60 feet in length. The two species, one a mammal and the other a shark, would have competed for the same prey. Large baleen whales and other marine mammals, turning the Miocene oceans into a stage for titanic battles. There is no evidence that ancient peoples knew of Leviathan directly. It had been extinct for millions of years before humans appeared, but Earth has a way of revealing its memory. Sometimes fossilized bones are exposed by erosion, their shapes sparking speculation among those who find them. Massive teeth, each as long as a forearm, might have inspired stories of sea beasts with jaws strong enough to crush ships, and when combined with the sight of modern whales breaching or hunting in coordinated pods, these fragments of evidence could have given rise to legends of monstrous creatures beneath the waves. Whether or not the Leviathan of scripture and myth was inspired by Leviathan itself, the fossil record now shows that such a predator truly existed. It was not a metaphor or a symbol, but a real hunter that once dominated the world's oceans. The power described in ancient texts, a beast capable of overturning ships in boiling seas, mirrors the reality of a whale so fierce that even other whales were its prey. Not all monsters, however, showed their power through teeth. Some appeared instead as long, sinuous shapes, stretching like ropes across the sea. For as long as humans have crossed the open sea, stories of long, coiling shapes beneath the waves have followed them. They are among the oldest and most persistent tales shared by sailors, accounts of creatures so long and sinuous they seem to stretch endlessly from one swell to the next. These weren't drunken dockside fictions. They were described in ship logs, expedition journals, and naval reports written by men whose livelihoods depended on accuracy. They spoke of bodies rolling and bending beneath the water's surface, of ridges rising and falling in rhythmic waves, of narrow heads emerging briefly before slipping silently back below. And they gave these shapes a name that captured both their mystery and their menace: Sea serpents. One of the most well known accounts came from the mid 19th century aboard the British warship HMS Daedalus. As the vessel made its way through the South Atlantic, its crew reported seeing a creature unlike anything they had encountered before. It was estimated to be more than 60 feet long, its dark, ridged back gliding swiftly against the current. Its head, raised several feet above the water, moved with a strange, deliberate motion. The officers, bound by duty to report their observations precisely, wrote down what they had seen and signed their names to it. The account sparked fierce debate among scientists and naturalists across Europe. Was this proof of a new species, or merely a case of mistaken identity shaped by long days at sea? The Daedalus sighting was far from an isolated event. Logs from ships centuries earlier tell similar stories. A Norwegian missionary in the 1700s described a serpent as thick as a man's body that swam beside his vessel before vanishing into the depths. Scandinavian fishermen spoke of creatures that rolled through the water like enormous ropes, their heads rising briefly above the surface before disappearing without a trace. Even into the 20th century, trained observers continued to file reports of long, snake like animals that seemed to defy explanation. It is easy to see why such sightings captured imaginations. Across cultures, serpents have symbolized chaos and the unknown. Norse legends speak of Jormungandr, a serpent so vast it encircles the world. Chinese tradition tells of sea dragons that govern tides and storms, so when sailors witnessed something undulating beneath the water, their minds reached instinctively for familiar imagery. It was not a fish, nor a whale. It moved like a serpent, so a serpent it must have been. But as marine science matured, the sea's secrets slowly gave way to explanation. Many sightings that once seemed impossible now have plausible biological sources. One of the most likely culprits is the oarfish, a deep sea dweller with a slender ribbon like body that can exceed 20 feet and in rare cases more than 30. Its long dorsal fin ripples like a living sail as it swims, and its silvery body shimmers just beneath the surface. Oarfish normally inhabit the twilight zone hundreds of feet down, but they occasionally rise when injured, disoriented, or dying. To sailors with no knowledge of such a creature, the sight of one writhing near the surface, its body moving like a living rope, would have been unforgettable. Other explanations lie closer to the surface. Basking sharks, for example, are massive plankton feeders that cruise slowly with their mouths wide open. When they die and begin to decompose, their bodies can fragment in ways that leave behind a long, snake like carcass, often mistaken for something more monstrous. Giant eels, too, may have contributed to the stories. Some species grow over 10 feet long and can surface during migration, their sleek bodies slicing through the water in ways that resemble the motion of a serpent. Even when no animal was present, the sea itself often conspired to deceive the eye. A pod of porpoises swimming in tight formation could appear as the undulating body of a single massive creature. A line of waves cresting over a submerged log could mimic the rhythmic rise and fall of something alive. And the distortions of light, mist, and distance often transformed ordinary phenomena into extraordinary visions. A sailor, weary from weeks at sea, scanning a shifting horizon, could easily interpret what he saw as evidence of something alive and immense. What made these sightings so powerful was their fleeting nature. Rarely did anyone see a full body. More often it was a glimpse, a dark ridge rising, a long form twisting beneath the surface, a narrow head gliding silently forward before vanishing into the depths. These moments left more questions than answers, and in the absence of answers, stories grew. Today, the oarfish remains one of the most mysterious creatures in the sea. It is rarely observed alive in its natural habitat, and much of what scientists know comes from stranded individuals washed ashore. This scarcity is part of what gives rise to myth. A creature that spends nearly all its life hundreds of feet below, appearing only briefly and unpredictably, is bound to become the stuff of legend. And when that creature's movements echo the shape and motion of a serpent, slow, deliberate, almost otherworldly, it is easy to understand how, for centuries, sailors gazing across the endless water believed they had witnessed something ancient and immense. One captain would write what he saw in careful prose, then sign his name. The age of sail was a time when ships were small, the oceans were endless, and every voyage felt like a venture into a living mystery. Wooden hulls creaked as they pushed through swells that seemed to stretch on forever, and every sailor knew that beneath the surface was a world they could neither see nor fully understand. Storms, reefs, and hunger were dangers they could prepare for, but there was another, stranger fear that clung to those who spent their lives at sea. The fear that something alive might rise from the depths, something so vast and powerful that a ship and its crew would simply vanish beneath the waves. Few stories capture that fear as vividly as what happened aboard a British warship called HMS Daedalus in the summer of 1848. The vessel was making its way home from the East Indies, cutting across the South Atlantic, when the lookout shouted from the mast. At first, those on deck thought he had spotted a drifting log. Then the log moved. It lifted itself from the surface, its long neck arching several feet into the air, and began gliding through the water with deliberate speed. It held its course steadily as the Daedalus drew nearer, never diving or thrashing, but moving with the slow, powerful grace of a creature that belonged there. Captain Peter McQuay and his officers estimated that the thing was at least 60 feet long. They saw no fins, no flukes, no obvious features they could match to a known animal. The head, which they described as serpentine, swayed slightly as it swam, as if the unseen bulk below the surface were propelling it forward with slow, muscular strokes. For several minutes it moved alongside the ship, close enough for the officers to study its ridged back against the bright surface of the sea. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone, vanishing into the water without a trace. When the Daedalus returned to England, Captain McQuay filed a formal report with the Admiralty. He and his officers described what they had seen in careful, measured language. The account was later published in the Illustrated London News, where it ignited fierce debate. Scientists argued over what the sailors might have witnessed. Some dismissed the story outright, calling it an exaggeration born of exhaustion and distance. Others speculated that the crew had glimpsed an unknown marine reptile, perhaps some relic from the age of the dinosaurs. A few even suggested the possibility of a massive, undiscovered fish species. But there was no consensus, and the mystery lingered. The Daedalus sighting was not the only encounter of its kind, but it was by far the most detailed and credible. Just a few decades earlier, in 1771, the crew of the French ship Aigle reported a creature of astonishing length moving purposefully through the waters off Angola. Its back rose and fell in a slow undulating motion, and its speed was far greater than that of any whale or shark they had seen. In 1833, sailors aboard the Rob Roy described a long-bodied animal off the Cape of Good Hope, with a narrow head that rose above the waves and a sinuous motion that reminded them of a snake sliding through grass. The scientific explanations for what these sailors saw remain uncertain, but a few stand out as plausible. One is the oarfish, a deep-sea species that can reach over 30 feet in length. Rarely seen near the surface, these silvery ribbon-like creatures occasionally rise when injured, dying, or confused by changes in temperature. When they swim, their long dorsal fins ripple in a way that can create the illusion of a series of humps or a raised neck, An oarfish viewed from the deck of a ship, especially through mist or glare, could easily be mistaken for a single colossal creature. Another possibility involves the misinterpretation of whale behavior. Large whales sometimes surface in unusual ways, their backs breaking the water in a pattern that from a distance looks like a continuous serpentine body. A single fin or an arched spine glimpsed briefly through choppy water could appear to be a head rising above the waves. Even the motion of a pod of whales traveling close together might look like one immense animal, especially to eyes already conditioned by months of isolation and stories of monsters. The details in these accounts are striking, not just for what they describe, but for what they leave out. None of the observers claimed to see an entire creature clearly from head to tail. They saw pieces, a neck here, a back there, a rhythmic motion that vanished as quickly as it appeared. The sea has a way of showing fragments, then swallowing them again, leaving the mind to connect the pieces. In that space between what is seen and what is guessed, legends grow. It is possible that the Daedalus and others encountered a known animal behaving in an unexpected way. It is also possible that they glimpsed something that has yet to be described by science. What is certain is that those who saw these creatures believed what they saw. They were seasoned sailors and officers trained to observe carefully and report honestly. Their records remain among the most detailed we have, and they remind us how vast the gulf still is between what we know about the sea and what remains hidden beneath its surface. On land, another serpent seemed to rise, not from water, but from stone. The story of Basilosaurus begins not in the depths of the ocean, but beneath the quiet soils of the American South. In the early decades of the 19th century, long before scientists fully understood how whales had evolved, farmers and fossil hunters began to uncover enormous bones from layers of ancient sediment in Alabama and Mississippi. They were unlike anything familiar. The vertebrae were long, cylindrical, and strangely smooth, tapering in a way that reminded those who found them of giant snakes. Some of the bones stretched several inches across, and their size alone suggested a creature of astonishing length. No one had ever seen an animal like it alive, so they turned to the closest comparison they knew, a sea serpent. In the early 1830s, when these discoveries first reached the scientific community, they caused a stir. Scholars debated what sort of creature could produce such bones. The leading theory was that they belonged to a massive marine reptile, a distant relative of the great mosasaurs or plesiosaurs that had vanished with the age of dinosaurs. The name they eventually settled on reflected that belief. They called it Basilosaurus, meaning king lizard. It was an impressive title, a name worthy of a creature thought to have ruled the seas. But the name was wrong. As more complete skeletons were unearthed and carefully studied, small but crucial details began to contradict the idea of a reptile. The vertebrae, while long and sinuous, were arranged like those of a mammal. The teeth, though sharp and conical, were more complex than those of a lizard or snake. Most puzzling of all were the remnants of tiny hind limbs tucked near the pelvis. They were useless for walking or swimming, but they were unmistakably mammalian. Bit by bit, the evidence forced scientists to confront a surprising truth. Basilosaurus was not a reptile at all. It was a whale. This discovery changed more than just the creature's classification. It transformed the way scientists understood whale evolution itself. Basilosaurus lived roughly 40 million years ago, during the Eocene epoch, when the oceans were filled with creatures now long extinct. It was a descendant of four-legged mammals that had returned to the water millions of years earlier, adapting over time to life in a fully aquatic world. Yet Basilosaurus still bore traces of its terrestrial ancestry. Its vestigial limbs, though shrunken and functionless, told the story of an evolutionary journey from land to sea. Unlike modern whales, which move with vertical tail strokes and often filter feed on tiny prey, Basilosaurus was built for predation. It stretched more than 50 feet in length, with a long, sinuous body that moved through the water in undulating waves. Its jaws were narrow and lined with powerful teeth, perfectly suited for gripping and tearing. Fossil evidence suggests that it fed on large fish, sharks, and even smaller whales. Bite marks found on the bones of contemporaneous marine mammals match the size and spacing of its teeth, evidence of a formidable hunter that dominated the ancient seas. Its elongated shape also played a role in one of the great scientific misinterpretations of the 19th century. The serpentine body of Basilosaurus gave it a profile that was strikingly similar to the sea serpents described in maritime lore. Scientists, unfamiliar with such a creature, leaned into that resemblance when naming it. Newspapers and museums embraced it as proof that the oceans had once teemed with colossal, snake-like monsters. Illustrated reconstructions of Basilosaurus from that era show it twisting through the water like an eel the length of a ship, its head rearing above the waves like a serpent poised to strike. This confusion was scientific, not folk. It did not come from sailors' stories or from myths whispered across generations. It came from experts trying to make sense of incomplete evidence. Before paleontology had matured as a science, many scholars believed that the Earth's animals had always existed much as they were now. The discovery of Basilosaurus helped overturn that view. Here was clear evidence of a creature that had once dominated the seas but no longer existed. Its skeleton hinted at an oceanic world that had vanished millions of years before, populated by predators that had no living counterparts. Some of the most striking fossil specimens became public sensations. In the 1840s, a nearly complete set of Basilosaurus vertebrae was displayed in London, where crowds lined up to see what they believed to be the remains of a legendary sea dragon. Naturalists speculated about whether such creatures might still lurk in unexplored parts of the ocean. Even after the scientific consensus shifted and Basilosaurus was recognized as a whale, that sense of wonder persisted. The image of a serpent-like predator gliding through ancient waters was too powerful to vanish entirely. Today, Basilosaurus stands as one of the most dramatic examples of evolution's long arc. It shows how whales did not simply appear as gentle giants, but passed through a predatory chapter in their history. It reveals how mammalian anatomy can be reshaped over millions of years, producing bodies so alien they were once mistaken for reptiles. And it offers a reminder of how easily even the best scientific minds can be misled by appearances, especially when the evidence seems to echo the old stories of monsters at sea. Long before humans had words like fossil or extinction, they were already digging up traces of ancient worlds they could not possibly imagine. Across continents and centuries, people stumbled upon enormous bones and strange shapes entombed in stone. They were heavier than any animal bones they knew, more massive than any beast alive, and often found in places where no creature could live today. Without the framework of geology or evolutionary history to explain them, those early discoveries were interpreted in the only way they could be, through stories. In the rocky hills of ancient Greece, shepherds sometimes came across vast jaws studded with teeth, vertebrae the size of a man's hand, or ribs that arched taller than a human. These relics were unlike anything they had seen before. To them, they were the remains of titans and dragons, the physical evidence of heroic battles sung in epic poems. The Greek poet Hesiod spoke of monstrous beings that once roamed the earth before being slain by the gods, and many believed the bones embedded in limestone cliffs were proof that such creatures had once lived. Even Aristotle, who tried to catalog the natural world with reason, speculated about these mysterious remains but could not explain them. Far to the east, in China, the discovery of such bones was woven deeply into cultural practice. Farmers digging into riverbanks unearthed fragments of massive femurs and skulls, often polished smooth by centuries of erosion. These were ground into powder and used as medicine, known as dragon bones. The name was not metaphorical. To those who found them, they were truly the remains of dragons, powerful beings that once ruled the land and sky. The persistence of dragon mythology across East Asian cultures may owe much to these silent witnesses from prehistory, their enormous size and unfamiliar shape lending weight to the stories told about them. In the deserts and hills of the Middle East, the bones of marine reptiles sometimes emerged from strata that had once been ocean floors. Here, mosasaurs and ichthyosaurs had swum millions of years before, and their fossilized skeletons sometimes appeared atop mountains that had long since risen from the sea. Their skulls were elongated and filled with sharp, conical teeth. Their vertebrae were arranged in long, tapering sequences, hinting at bodies built for swift movement through water. To those who discovered them without the benefit of deep time, they were unmistakably monstrous. Some believed they were the remains of sea dragons described in creation myths. Others connected them to the Leviathan, the fearsome sea creature described in ancient Hebrew texts. The ichthyosaurs, in particular, must have puzzled early finders. Their bodies resembled enormous fish or dolphins, but their anatomy did not match any known animal. Their skulls had vast eye sockets, suggesting they were sight hunters in dark waters, and their bodies were shaped for speed and predation. A single partial skeleton, exposed by erosion, could easily be mistaken for the remains of a colossal serpent. When plesiosaurs were first unearthed, their elongated necks and paddle-like limbs added another layer of mystery. A fossilized plesiosaur skull, with its rows of sharp teeth and reptilian snout, could have inspired stories of lake monsters and sea serpents emerging from the deep. Even in more recent centuries, before paleontology became a formal science, such discoveries continued to confound. In the 1770s, quarry workers near Maastricht in the Netherlands uncovered the skull of a massive marine reptile embedded in chalk. Today we know it was a mosasaur, but at the time, no one could agree on its identity. Some naturalists suggested it was a type of crocodile, while others believed it to be an unknown species of whale. Religious scholars speculated that it might be the remains of one of the biblical sea beasts, perhaps even the legendary Leviathan itself. Other finds inspired similar speculation. In parts of Europe and North America, fossilized vertebrae and teeth were displayed as the remains of dragons, sometimes even incorporated into church relics. The enormous jawbones of marine reptiles were occasionally identified as the bones of giants from myth. Without knowledge of evolution or extinction, people sought meaning in what they knew, and their interpretations often aligned with the stories their cultures had preserved for centuries. These early interpretations were not foolish or misguided. They were the natural human response to mystery. When confronted with physical evidence that did not fit into their understanding of the world, people turned to the language of legend. The colossal size of a mosasaur skull made sense if it belonged to a dragon slain by a god. The serpentine curve of a plesiosaur's neck fit the description of a creature that once churned the seas. The sleek shape of an ichthyosaur's body matched stories of swift, elusive beasts that prowled beneath the waves. Myth and evidence intertwined, each giving the other weight and meaning. Over time, these fossils shaped the monsters of folklore, just as much as folklore shaped their interpretation. The sinuous coils of a plesiosaur, the dagger-like teeth of a mosasaur, the predatory grace of an ichthyosaur, all of them left deep impressions on human imagination. Even today, echoes of those interpretations persist. The dragons of legend, the sea serpents that haunt sailors' tales, and the monstrous beasts of ancient epics all bear the unmistakable stamp of prehistoric life, filtered through the lens of myth. Rock told one part of the story, cameras would tell another. Deep beneath the icy waters of the Southern Ocean, far below the reach of sunlight and beyond the limits of ordinary exploration, there lives a creature that would have seemed impossible even in the most extravagant sea legends. It is not a myth born from sailors' tales, nor a fossil from a vanished age. It is alive today, thriving in the cold darkness of the Antarctic deep. Scientists call it Mesonicoteuthis hamiltoni, the colossal squid. For centuries, the giant squid held the crown as the largest cephalopod known to science. With its long, tapering body and arms stretching more than 40 feet, it became the living explanation for the kraken myths that haunted maritime folklore. But as remarkable as the giant squid is, it is only part of the story. A deeper, heavier, and stranger relative lurked beneath it, unknown to science until recent decades. The colossal squid is shorter in length than its giant cousin, but it dwarfs it in mass, sometimes weighing more than 1,000 pounds. Its mantle, the muscular main body of a squid, is thick and powerful, built not for speed, but for strength and ambush in the cold abyss. The colossal squid's anatomy is unlike any other squid on Earth. Its tentacles, rather than ending in simple suction cups, are armed with swiveling hooks that can rotate as they grip, slicing and anchoring into the flesh of prey. These hooks, combined with its thick, muscular arms, make it a formidable predator, capable of overpowering large fish and even other cephalopods. Its beak, shaped like that of a parrot and razor sharp, is among the most powerful in the animal kingdom, easily tearing through flesh and bone once the prey is secured. One of the most extraordinary features of this animal is its vision. The colossal squid has the largest eyes known in the living world, each one measuring over a foot across. These massive organs are exquisitely sensitive to light, capable of detecting even the faintest bioluminescent glimmers in the pitch-black waters of the Antarctic deep. Such sensitivity is vital in a world without sunlight. Tiny flashes produced by disturbed plankton or the bioluminescent flicker of smaller organisms can reveal the approach of predators or prey hundreds of feet away. This allows the squid to react with precision long before its presence is detected. Life at such depths shapes every aspect of the colossal squid's biology. The cold temperatures of the Southern Ocean slow metabolism, allowing the squid to conserve energy while it waits for prey to pass close enough to strike. Its habitat, often thousands of feet beneath the surface, is a realm few human eyes have seen. The pressure there is immense, and the darkness is absolute. It is a world defined by patience, stealth, and ambush traits that the colossal squid has mastered over millions of years of evolution. Our understanding of this creature is still fragmentary. For most of human history, its existence was known only indirectly. Sperm whales, which dive to similar depths in search of food, often surface with strange circular scars on their skin, marks consistent with the suction and hooks of a large cephalopod. These whales also sometimes carry remnants of colossal squid in their stomachs, evidence that the two species share the same remote ecosystem and may encounter each other far more often than we realize. The squid does not hunt whales, but the scars show that their paths cross in ways that leave traces on the world above. Direct evidence of the colossal squid's life has been rare and fleeting. The first intact specimen was hauled up accidentally by a fishing vessel near Antarctica in the early 21st century. It was an immense, pale creature with arms still bristling with rotating hooks and eyes that had never seen sunlight. Since then, only a handful have been captured or found, and each has provided valuable insights into this elusive predator's anatomy and life history. But much about it remains a mystery. Even more revealing are the brief, grainy glimpses captured by deep sea cameras. In the blackness of the abyss, a massive shape glides silently into view, its fins pulsing gently as it maneuvers through the water. Arms unfurl in a sudden burst of speed, striking at unseen prey, and then the creature vanishes into the dark. These moments, often lasting only seconds, are among the rarest pieces of footage in marine science. Yet they confirm that the colossal squid is not a relic or a legend, but a living part of Earth's most mysterious ecosystem. Every new piece of evidence raises new questions. Scientists still do not know how large these squids can grow, how often they reproduce, or how they interact with the other inhabitants of the deep. They remain one of the least studied large animals on the planet, their biology pieced together from fragments and fleeting observations. Yet even with these gaps, one fact is clear. The colossal squid is a living embodiment of the deep ocean's power and mystery, a reminder that the most extraordinary life on Earth often thrives far beyond our reach. The biology is only half the story. The rest is written in scars and echoes, far beneath the reach of light. In the crushing stillness of the abyss, two giants meet in battles that have shaped their species for millions of years. One is the sperm whale, a mammal larger than a school bus and capable of diving deeper than almost any other air-breathing animal. The other is the colossal squid, a massive cephalopod built for ambush in the dark, armed with rotating hooks and a beak capable of cutting through flesh. They inhabit a realm few eyes have ever seen, where the pressure could crush steel and the cold would freeze blood. Yet here, in this alien world, their timeless conflict unfolds again and again. The first evidence of these encounters is written not in the deep itself, but on the bodies of the whales that return from it. When sperm whales surface, their skin often bears unmistakable signs of struggle, circular sucker marks arranged in perfect rings, deep gashes where hooked tentacles once clung, and scars that stretch across their heads and flanks. Some are fresh and raw, signs of a recent fight. Others are pale and layered, old wounds healed over from countless encounters. Each one is a trace of the colossal squid's last desperate attempt to defend itself, and a record of how often these two giants cross paths far below the surface. These scars are not the only evidence. Scientists have found more direct clues within the whales themselves. Deep in their stomachs, preserved through digestion, lie the beaks of colossal squid, sharp, chitinous tools that even a whale's powerful acids cannot dissolve. Alongside these beaks are fragments of muscle tissue and, on rare occasions, partial limbs. These remains are the aftermath of a successful hunt, proof that despite the squid's formidable defenses, the sperm whale usually prevails. Yet the size of these beaks tells its own story. Some belong to squid more than 30 feet long, nearly half the size of the predators that consumed them. Encounters of that scale are not mere skirmishes, but full-blown battles fought in complete darkness. The nature of those battles has been pieced together not only from scars and remains, but also from sound. Sperm whales hunt in a world without light, relying on echolocation to see their prey. They produce powerful clicks that travel through the water, bouncing back from anything solid. As a whale descends into the deep and closes in on a target, these clicks accelerate into rapid bursts, known as buzzes, a biological signal that the hunt is reaching its climax. It is often at this moment, just before impact, that the squid must fight back. Although slower and less agile than its predator, the colossal squid is far from helpless. Its tentacles, tipped with swiveling hooks, can clamp down and dig deep into a whale's flesh. Its parrot like beak, hidden at the base of those tentacles, is sharp enough to slice through muscle and skin. If the whale fails to seize its prey immediately, the squid can twist and lash in defense, leaving the kinds of scars that researchers later study on the whales' bodies. In those moments, thousands of feet below the waves, the outcome of the encounter is uncertain. Some squid escape, most do not. Sometimes, the evidence of these struggles reaches the surface in more dramatic ways. Sailors through history have reported mysterious scenes, great bodies thrashing in the water, long limbs breaking the waves, or strange remains drifting in the currents. While they did not understand what they were witnessing, it is possible that they saw fragments of these deep ocean battles, a whale finishing its kill, or the torn remains of a colossal squid rising from the depths. To them, these moments were evidence of monsters. To science, they are glimpses of a natural conflict that has been unfolding unseen for millions of years. Despite these clues, no one has ever recorded a full encounter from start to finish. The depths where they occur are too hostile for human observation. Even advanced submersibles struggle against the pressure, and cameras rarely capture more than fleeting moments. What we know is reconstructed from the traces left behind, the scars etched into skin, the undigested beaks, the echoes of sonar pulses in the deep. Together, they reveal a world defined by predator and prey, locked in a dynamic that has shaped their evolution over geological time. Both creatures bear the marks of that shared history. The sperm whale's massive head, filled with a substance called spermaceti, helps it focus powerful sound waves and endure the immense pressures of deep dives. The colossal squid's eyes, larger than those of any other animal, allow it to detect faint bioluminescent glows that betray the approach of predators or prey. Every feature of their anatomy is an adaptation to this ongoing struggle, honed over countless generations of survival in one of Earth's harshest environments. The battles continue, far below the ships that cross the ocean's surface. They are silent and unseen, yet their consequences reach upward in the marks whales bear and the stories humans tell. What happens there reminds us that life's fiercest conflicts often unfold far from view, in the dark places of the world, where evolution still writes its story in teeth, scars, and echoes. Not every face at sea belonged to a predator. Some were faces our minds composed. For as long as people have crossed the oceans, stories have followed them over the waves, stories of beings that were neither fully human nor entirely of the sea. These creatures were said to rise from the depths and watch passing ships with knowing eyes. Some appeared as pale figures with flowing hair drifting silently beside the hull. Others sang haunting songs that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Ancient poets spoke of sirens whose voices lured sailors to destruction, and medieval maps were inked with warnings of mermaids waiting beyond the edge of the known world. Sailors, weary from months at sea, swore they had seen them with their own eyes, their faces breaking the surface, just long enough to vanish again beneath the waves. But behind the veil of myth lies a more earthly story, one rooted not in magic but in biology and perception. Many of those supposed encounters with mermaids and sirens were likely encounters with real animals, creatures that still glide through the water today. They were dugongs, manatees, and seals, marine mammals that share distant ancestry with us and move through the sea with shapes and gestures that, under the right conditions, can seem strangely familiar. Dugongs and manatees, collectively known as Sirenians, inhabit warm coastal waters where they graze on seagrass and other vegetation. They are slow moving and gentle, with rounded bodies and paddle like flippers. When they surface to breathe, they rise slowly and smoothly, revealing rounded heads with forward facing eyes and broad, flat snouts. From a distance, and especially in dim light, a surfacing dugong can look uncannily like a human torso rising from the water. Sometimes they feed near the surface in an upright position, their heads and shoulders visible above the waves in a way that can easily be mistaken for someone treading water. In the half light of dawn or dusk, a brief glimpse like this might be all it took to plant the seed of a legend. Seals, too, played their part in shaping these stories. Unlike Sirenians, seals are agile and curious, darting through the water with quick, fluid motions. When they rest at the surface, they often float on their backs, their flippers bent in ways that resemble arms. Their large, dark eyes seem to track movement, giving the impression of conscious observation. On remote coasts, where ships anchored near colonies, sailors sometimes saw them gathered on the rocks, their sleek bodies upright and their heads turning as if in conversation. In such moments, the line between animal and myth grew thin. Part of the reason these misinterpretations were so common lies deep within the workings of the human mind. Humans are wired to look for patterns and, above all, to recognize faces. This tendency, known as pareidolia, helps us make sense of our surroundings quickly and efficiently. It is why we see faces in the shapes of clouds or human figures in the flicker of a fire. At sea, this instinct can easily blur perception. A rounded head, a suggestion of eyes, or the rhythmic motion of flippers breaking the surface can trigger that ancient recognition response. The brain fills in what the eyes do not clearly see, turning ambiguous shapes into familiar forms. The harsh realities of long voyages amplified this effect. Life aboard a sailing ship was exhausting. Sailors endured months with little sleep, poor nutrition, and constant exposure to the elements. Many spent long stretches without seeing another human beyond the crew. In such conditions, the mind could become fertile ground for illusions. A tired eye might transform a surfacing manatee into a human figure. A flicker of movement might become a waving hand. Once such a sighting was shared among the crew, imagination would often take over, layering detail upon detail until the story felt more vivid than the moment that inspired it. Those stories quickly grew beyond the simple reality of what had been seen. A curious dugong became a mermaid singing in an unknown tongue. A seal's dark, watchful eyes became the gaze of a siren, drawing men to their doom. Artists, relying on second-hand accounts, gave these figures human features and flowing hair, shaping an image that would endure for centuries. In the early 1700s, even seasoned explorers were not immune to such illusions. Christopher Columbus recorded seeing 3 mermaids near the Caribbean, remarking that they were not as beautiful as they are painted. Historians now believe he was describing manatees feeding near the surface. Similar reports emerged across the Indian and Pacific Oceans, where sailors spoke of sea women that modern science now understands as dugongs. Existing myths provided a framework into which these sightings naturally fit. The sirens of Greek mythology, once imagined as bird-like spirits, became associated with the half-human, half-fish creatures described by sailors. European folklore wove new details into old stories, merging ancient fears with new encounters. A seal resting on a rock was retold as a mermaid combing her hair. A fleeting shadow beneath a ship became a mysterious companion swimming just out of reach. Over generations, these stories gained layers of symbolism, transforming ordinary animals into figures of beauty, danger, and mystery. Even now, centuries after science revealed the truth, the image of the mermaid endures. It lingers in literature and art, in songs and legends, and in the deep places of the human imagination where myth and memory blur together. What began as a trick of light, a tired mind, or a distant shape glimpsed on the water has become one of the sea's most enduring stories, a reflection of how easily we see ourselves, even in the faces of creatures that are nothing like us. And sometimes the night water did glow, not with eyes, but with life. Far below the surface, in the cold and endless dark where sunlight can never reach, the ocean glows. The light is not cast by the moon or reflected from distant shores. It is born from life itself. It flickers and pulses, drifts and blooms, spreading soft halos of blue and green across the water like stars scattered through a midnight sky. For most of human history, no one knew what created these strange underwater lights. All they saw were shifting shapes and pale glimmers rising from the depths, and from those brief glimpses, stories of ghostly sea creatures were born. Sailors spoke of luminous eyes peering up from beneath their ships, of glowing tendrils coiling just below the surface, and of strange lights that followed them through the night, as if some invisible presence were keeping pace. Some described vast, glowing shapes that seemed to breathe beneath the waves, or long trails of light that curved through the blackness like the outlines of unseen beasts. At a time when the open ocean at night was utterly dark, such sights were both bewildering and unforgettable. Without a scientific explanation, they were often interpreted as spirits, drowned souls, or monsters that glowed from within. The truth, revealed only in the past 2 centuries, is that the sea is alive, with creatures capable of making their own light, a phenomenon known as bioluminescence. It is one of the oldest and most widespread traits in the history of life. More than 3/4 of the animals that inhabit the deep ocean can produce light, and they do so for many reasons: to lure prey close, to warn predators away, to attract mates, or even to hide from danger. In a world without sunlight, light itself becomes a tool for survival. Among the most mesmerizing of these light makers are comb jellies. Unlike true jellyfish, comb jellies do not sting. Instead, their translucent, fragile bodies ripple with rows of tiny cilia hair-like structures that scatter light into dazzling, shifting rainbows. This shimmering display is not bioluminescence, but a physical effect, a structural scattering of light. Yet many species of comb jelly also produce true bioluminescent glows, casting soft blue-green waves through the water as they drift. To sailors watching from above, a cluster of comb jellies rising toward the surface could look like a procession of glowing spirits, their lights pulsing gently in the dark. Some of the ocean's strangest lights come from siphonophores, enormous colonies made up of hundreds or even thousands of individual organisms working together as one. Some siphonophores stretch for more than 100 feet, longer than the largest whale, and many are capable of producing light. They use bioluminescence in complex ways, from glowing lures that attract prey to sudden flashes that confuse predators. When an entire siphonophore colony drifts beneath a ship, its long, glowing form can be mistaken for the outline of a colossal creature moving silently through the night. Deeper still, jellyfish with bells as wide as dinner plates pulse slowly through the abyss, trailing bioluminescent tendrils behind them like glowing threads. Some release clouds of luminous mucus when disturbed, leaving behind drifting, ghostly patches of light that can hover in the water for minutes before fading away. Early explorers described these encounters with language borrowed from the supernatural, calling them phantoms or ghost fires. Even now, the sight of a jellyfish erupting in sudden bursts of light in the blackness of the deep is among the most otherworldly spectacles in nature. Not all glowing life in the sea is large or dramatic. Much of it comes from organisms so small they can only be seen with the naked eye when they gather in vast numbers. Bioluminescent plankton, microscopic drifters that float near the surface, are among the most abundant light producers on Earth. When disturbed by the movement of waves, the splash of an oar, or the hull of a passing ship, they release brilliant flashes of light. To sailors, it could seem as though their vessels were cutting through glowing water. Entire patches of ocean have been known to shimmer in this way for miles, a phenomenon known as a milky sea. Historical records describe ships sailing through glowing water that stretched to the horizon, the surface lit from within, as if by some unseen force. Bioluminescence is far more than a spectacle. For many creatures, it is a finely tuned tool. Some fish dangle glowing lures from their heads, drawing prey close enough to strike. Others produce light to blend in with the faint glow from above, hiding their silhouettes from predators lurking below. Certain squid eject glowing clouds to distract attackers, leaving behind false targets while they escape into the darkness. Even deep-sea crustaceans use light to communicate, sending coded pulses into the black water. For sailors and explorers in centuries past, these living lights were beyond explanation. They had no knowledge of the chemical reactions that powered them or the evolutionary pressures that shaped them. All they could do was watch as the sea beneath them came alive with mysterious glows and drifting lights. In that darkness, where the known world ended and the unknown began, it was easy to believe they were witnessing something supernatural. When scientists finally began to study these phenomena in the 19th and 20th centuries, they discovered the astonishing diversity of creatures that make their own light. They collected glowing plankton and kept them alive in glass jars, dissected luminous jellyfish to understand their biology, and lowered cameras into the abyss to record their displays. Yet even now, much remains a mystery. New species are still being discovered, and the full complexity of bioluminescent communication is only beginning to be understood. The lights that once inspired stories of ghostly beasts still drift beneath the waves today. They swirl and pulse in the darkness, silent signals in a hidden world that has been glowing since long before humans learned to sail. They are not spirits or monsters, but the heartbeat of life itself, flickering in the places where sunlight can never reach. Across the islands of the Pacific and along the ancient rivers of East Asia, stories of the sea were once spoken in chants, songs, and hushed warnings. They were not written down, yet they endured for centuries, passed from mouth to mouth as carefully as navigation routes and star maps. These stories spoke of great beings that lived beneath the waves, creatures with tempers and wills of their own, whose moods could shape the fate of those who dared to cross their waters. To those who grew up hearing them, these were not just tales, they were memory, knowledge, and caution woven together, a living map of the sea's hidden dangers. Among the Maori of Aotearoa, now called New Zealand, one such being was the Taniwha. The Taniwha was said to live where the waters were deepest and most treacherous, in river mouths, where currents shifted without warning, in dark channels that hid submerged rocks, or in ocean caves where whirlpools formed and vanished without a trace. Some Taniwha were protectors, guiding canoes safely along their routes if treated with respect. Others were dangerous and unpredictable, known to overturn boats or swallow anyone who strayed too close. Each had a name and a story, bound to a specific place that carried generations of warning in its memory. At first glance, these tales sound like pure legend, yet when studied alongside the landscapes they describe, a deeper layer emerges. Many places said to be home to Taniwha are precisely where the sea is most perilous: narrow channels with violent surges, reefs just below the surface, or areas prone to sudden tidal shifts. Some stories even hint at encounters with real animals. One likely inspiration is the saltwater crocodile, the largest living reptile on Earth and a predator that can travel astonishing distances across open ocean. Though it does not inhabit New Zealand's waters today, there is evidence that crocodiles occasionally reached the wider Pacific in earlier centuries. Even a single encounter with a creature of that size would have been unforgettable and passed down as a story worth remembering. Other Taniwha stories echo the behavior of sharks. Species like the great white and tiger shark have long prowled the same waters crossed by Polynesian navigators. They linger near river mouths and along reef edges, striking with sudden speed from below a pattern that fits neatly into descriptions of Taniwha that lurked in shallows and punished those who disrespected the sea. To travelers in small wooden waka, such predators would have seemed less like animals and more like spirits of the deep. Far from the Pacific, along the ancient waterways of East Asia, another water being shaped human understanding of the sea, the Jiao Long. In Chinese tradition, the Jiao Long was described as a river dragon or water serpent, long and sinuous, with the head of a crocodile and the body of a snake. It could churn rivers into whirlpools, summon storms, or drag boats beneath the surface. Villagers would leave offerings before crossings, hoping to earn safe passage through the waters it ruled. Here, too, the myth is rooted in encounters with the real. Saltwater crocodiles once ranged deep into the rivers of southern China, and they remain formidable predators throughout Southeast Asia. Large rays, which rise ghost-like from the riverbed with wide, undulating fins, may also have shaped the image of the Jiaolong. Even the weather itself left its mark on the legend. Monsoon rains and seasonal typhoons could transform calm waterways into raging floods, and their destructive force was often described as the wrath of the dragon. These stories were not merely entertainment, they were maps encoded in memory. When a tale warned that a Taniwha guarded a particular river mouth, it was often a way of telling sailors that strong rip currents lurked there, or that shifting sandbars could trap a canoe. When villagers spoke of a Jiaolong's anger, they were passing down hard-earned knowledge about flood-prone valleys or crocodile-infested waters. The act of offering gifts before a crossing, seen from a practical perspective, was a way of preparing for danger, a moment to stop, observe the water, and proceed with care. For communities whose lives depended on the sea, such knowledge was vital. These were people who crossed vast distances without charts or compasses, relying instead on stars, swells, and memory. The stories they told were another navigational tool. They stored information in a form that was easy to remember and hard to forget. A frightening image of a Taniwha or a vengeful Jiao Long ensured that no one would underestimate the risks hidden beneath the surface. Today, anthropologists and marine scientists often study these legends for the environmental clues they contain. They reveal migration patterns of predators, shifts in coastlines, and changes in water levels over centuries. They show how communities adapted to a world where nature could not be controlled but had to be understood and respected. In many ways, they represent one of humanity's oldest sciences, the science of observing the world and encoding that knowledge in story. The Taniwha and the Jiaolong remain alive in oral traditions, carved into wood and stone, sung in ceremonies, and spoken of by elders who remember the old warnings. They are more than mythical beasts. They are records of a deep relationship between people and water, between survival and memory, and at other times, the sea sent evidence ashore, along the edges of continents, where the sea meets land in a shifting border of tides and storms. There is another kind of sea monster. It does not rear from the depths with teeth and eyes. It does not chase ships or drag sailors into the abyss. It arrives quietly, borne on waves and currents, often long after life has left it behind. Its shape is usually wrong, too soft, too fibrous, too formless to fit any known creature. Yet its size and strangeness spark the oldest instinct in us. To give it a name, a story, and a place in the catalogue of the unknown. These are the globsters, the shapeless beasts the ocean sometimes returns to shore. One of the earliest and most famous of these mysteries appeared on the sands of Florida in the winter of 1896. Two boys walking along street, Augustine Beach, stumbled upon a massive, pale mass half buried in the tide line. It was slick and rubbery, pinkish white in color, and so large that it covered more than 6 meters of beach. No bones were visible. No head or fins could be clearly identified. Some local residents insisted it was the remains of a whale. Others, gripped by a more dramatic thought, believed they had found the carcass of a colossal octopus, a creature larger than any known to science. Newspapers around the country published illustrations of an enormous cephalopod capable of dragging ships beneath the waves. Naturalists of the time, lacking the tools to analyze the tissue, could only speculate, and so the street Augustine sea monster entered folklore as evidence that the deep might still hold giants beyond our understanding. More than 80 years later, the tide would deliver another riddle. In the summer of 1960, a strange, fibrous carcass washed ashore on a remote stretch of the Tasmanian coast. It was immense, featureless, and baffling. Its texture reminded observers of plant fiber more than flesh, yet it emitted the unmistakable stench of decay. It had no visible skeleton, no clear anatomy, and none of the markers that would help scientists classify it. They called it a globster, a term that would soon become shorthand for any such mysterious mass, and the name would stick. The sea, it seemed, was not done with these puzzles. In 1977, the Japanese fishing vessel Zuio Maru hauled an enormous decaying carcass from the waters off New Zealand. The body was long and narrow, with what appeared to be a stretched neck and 4 flipper-like limbs. Crew members photographed it before throwing it back into the water, and those images quickly spread around the world. The shape seemed unmistakable to many. It looked like a plesiosaur, one of the great marine reptiles that had ruled the oceans during the time of the dinosaurs. If the identification was correct, it would mean that a creature believed extinct for 65 million years had somehow survived into the modern era. The press erupted with speculation. Museums demanded samples, and for a brief moment, the idea of living prehistoric giants felt tantalizingly real. Yet science, when given the chance to examine the evidence, told a different story. Marine biologists recognized a familiar pattern. The neck was not a neck at all, but the exposed vertebrae of a large shark, most likely a basking shark, one of the ocean's gentlest giants. When these sharks die and decompose, their heads and tails detach first, leaving behind a body with elongated vertebrae and trailing fins that can easily be mistaken for a long-necked creature. The Zuio Maru carcass was no relic from the age of dinosaurs. It was the distorted remains of a modern animal, reshaped by time and decay into something unrecognizable. The same story played out again and again. the enormous jelly-like mass found in street. Augustine was eventually identified as decomposed whale blubber, its original form completely transformed by bacteria and seawater. The hairy monster that washed up on a Bermuda beach in 1924 was not a new species, but another whale. Its skin and connective tissues unraveled into fibrous mats that looked like fur. Even the Tasmanian globster, which had seemed so alien at first glance, revealed itself under the microscope to be a lump of degraded collagen from a large marine mammal. The ocean is a master of disguise, and death gives it ample opportunity to alter the familiar. When a whale or shark dies, its carcass begins to break apart as bacteria and scavengers consume the softer tissues. Gases swell the body, tearing it open from within. Fins and tails slough away, leaving behind shapes that seem entirely new. What was once smooth skin becomes fibrous collagen, white and rope-like. Fat from the blubber can harden into waxy masses known as adipocere, which cling to decaying tissue and give the illusion of hair or plant fiber. Even experienced scientists have been fooled by these transformations, especially when the remains are missing key parts like skulls or bones. By the end of the 20th century, new technologies provided definitive answers. DNA sequencing and protein analysis allowed researchers to identify even degraded samples with precision. Globsters that had lingered unidentified for decades were tested and traced back to familiar origins. Whales, sharks, and large fish. None were evidence of undiscovered species. None were proof of prehistoric survivors. The monsters, it turned out, were the sea's own handiwork, illusions sculpted by decay and delivered to our shores. Yet the fascination endures. Each new globster that appears still draws crowds and headlines. They remind us that even with all our science, the sea retains the power to unsettle, to confuse, to make us wonder what else might be drifting beneath its surface. They blur the boundary between the known and the unknown, between biology and myth, between the world we understand and the one that still surprises us. And not all giants arrive as driftwood. Some once ruled the water, long before human ships traced lines across the oceans, before compasses pointed the way and satellites charted the globe. There was already a creature that ruled the seas with unmatched power. It swam through warm, shallow waters that covered much of the planet, an apex predator so dominant that few animals dared to challenge it. Scientists would one day name it Odidus megalodon, but its legend began millions of years before that name existed. Between roughly 23 million and 3.5 million years ago, it was the undisputed monarch of the marine world, shaping the behavior, evolution, and very structure of ocean life. The size of megalodon alone strains the imagination. Fossil evidence, especially the teeth and vertebrae that have survived the passage of time, suggests that this shark could reach lengths of more than 18 meters, far longer than a city bus. Large adults likely weighed between 30 and 60 metric tons, heavier than any living predatory animal on Earth today. Its mouth was vast, lined with rows of serrated teeth, each the size of a human hand. The jaws could open wide enough to engulf a pair of adult humans side by side, and the force of its bite was among the most powerful ever measured in the history of life. Estimates suggest it could crush bone with a pressure strong enough to split a whale's rib cage in a single, decisive strike. Despite its monstrous proportions, Megalodon was not some alien creature from the depths. It was a shark, a descendant of a lineage that stretched back hundreds of millions of years, long before the first dinosaurs ever took their first steps on land. But Megalodon's immense size and strength set it apart from every other shark that had come before. It was not a scavenger or an opportunist. It was a hunter built to dominate the largest prey the seas had to offer. Its favored targets were whales, dolphins, and large pinnipeds. Fossilized whale bones bear unmistakable evidence of these attacks, their surfaces marked by deep, clean cuts that match the shape and serrations of megalodon's teeth. Many of those bones show no sign of healing, a silent testament to how quickly and decisively the predator could dispatch its victims. The world in which Megalodon lived was a different place from our own. The continents were in familiar positions, but ocean currents and climates were shifting, creating vast, warm inland seas rich with life. Early whales were abundant and often smaller than the giants we know today, providing plentiful food for a predator of Megalodon's size. The shark's dominance was so complete that it likely influenced the evolution of other species. Smaller whales may have developed migratory patterns or formed pods, in part as strategies to evade such a formidable hunter. Long before science understood what those massive teeth represented, people were already finding them. In riverbeds, cliffs, and beaches, they appeared as polished, triangular stones. To those who discovered them, the idea that they once belonged to a living creature was inconceivable. Many cultures believed they were the tongues of dragons or the weapons of gods. In medieval Europe, they were called tongue stones and thought to possess magical powers. Even in the 18th century, when naturalists first realized these fossils were from an ancient shark, the revelation was unsettling. The oceans were still largely unexplored, and there was no reason to assume that such predators could not still exist in the uncharted depths. Megalodon's reign eventually came to an end around 3.5 million years ago. Climate change cooled the oceans, shrinking the warm coastal habitats it preferred. Shifting currents disrupted migration routes, and new predators, including the ancestors of modern great white sharks, may have competed with its young. Most importantly, the whales it depended on for food evolved into larger, faster species and began to migrate into colder waters where Megalodon could not follow. Over time, its population dwindled, and one of Earth's greatest hunters vanished. Yet its presence lingers in the collective imagination. Stories of colossal sharks continued to surface in maritime cultures around the world, from Polynesian tales of ocean demons to European legends of monstrous fish that swallowed boats whole. These stories, while exaggerated, echo a distant reality. For millions of years, the seas were home to a predator capable of killing the largest animals alive. Researchers have proposed that our deep-seated caution toward the ocean may reflect long-standing survival pressures rooted in such ancient realities. The unease many people feel when they cannot see what lies beneath their feet, the instinctive hesitation before stepping into dark water, may trace back to a time when large marine predators posed a genuine threat to our ancestors or their close relatives. Even though humans themselves never faced Megalodon, the creatures that shared their evolutionary past certainly did, and over countless generations, the habit of wariness near the water may have become woven into our nature. Today, the only traces of Megalodon are fossilized teeth and vertebrae buried in rock or washed onto beaches by the tide. They are heavy and razor-edged even after millions of years, and holding one offers a glimpse into a world where whales were prey and sharks ruled the seas. These relics remind us that the ocean once held hunters far more powerful than anything alive today, predators whose presence shaped ecosystems and whose legacy still ripples through the waters they once patrolled. And when those ancient teeth catch the light in a collector's hand, it is easy to imagine the shadow of the original sea demon still gliding somewhere beneath the waves. For most of human history, The open ocean was not a place of certainty but of endless questions. Before sonar mapped the seafloor and satellites tracked storms from space, sailors navigated a world that could change in an instant. The same waters that carried them across continents could just as easily turn against them. A sky that was calm one moment might hide forces building below, and a surface that appeared empty could erupt with sudden, violent motion. Lacking scientific explanations, people reached for stories to make sense of these events, and many of the sea's most enduring monsters were born not from living creatures, but from the ocean's own unpredictable behavior. One of the most dramatic and fearsome of these phenomena is the rogue wave. Today, we understand them as towering walls of water that appear without warning, the product of intersecting wave patterns, wind conditions, and currents combining in just the right way. But to sailors centuries ago, such a sudden surge was inexplicable. Imagine a small wooden ship, days from land, gliding across a calm sea under a blue horizon. Then, without sign or warning, a single massive wall of water rises from nowhere, perhaps more than 25 meters high, dwarfing the vessel and crashing down with destructive force. Many ships were torn apart by such waves, their survivors describing the sensation of something alive rising from below, as if the sea itself had reared up in anger. Without an understanding of fluid dynamics, this seemed less like physics and more like the strike of an immense hidden creature. Other events came from beneath the surface, where invisible forces can lie dormant for centuries before revealing themselves. In some regions, vast quantities of methane gas are trapped beneath layers of sediment on the seafloor. When tectonic movement or shifting pressures fracture those layers, the gas can escape all at once, rushing upward in a column of bubbles. To sailors above, the result appears as a sudden, frothing boil of water, as if something enormous were rising to the surface. Laboratory experiments have shown that if such gas releases are intense enough, they can drastically reduce the density of seawater, causing ships to lose buoyancy. However, while this effect is scientifically possible, there are no confirmed cases of real-world vessels sinking purely from methane eruptions. In an era before geology and chemistry explained such events, it was far easier to imagine a creature dragging ships downward into the deep. Whirlpools, too, inspired many tales of sea monsters. These spinning columns of water are created when strong currents or tidal flows collide, producing a powerful vortex that pulls surrounding water toward its center. The sight of a whirlpool forming suddenly in otherwise calm waters can be unnerving. Entire ships have been caught in their grip, drawn into swirling currents that seem to reach upward like the arms of an unseen beast. Mariners returning from such encounters often describe the sea swallowing their vessels whole or dragging them into an invisible mouth. Lacking the vocabulary to explain hydrodynamics, they imagined immense creatures lurking below, inhaling the ocean itself. Other natural phenomena were subtler, yet equally capable of inspiring stories of monsters and mysterious forces. Sea boils are one example, areas of water that appear to churn or pulse even when the surface around them is calm. These can be caused by rising underwater currents, volcanic activity, or shifts in water temperature and salinity that alter density patterns. To those on deck, though, the sight looked like the stirring of something alive just beneath the surface, as though a giant body were moving unseen below their vessel. Some of the most haunting accounts spoke of glowing shapes in the dark water. At night, ships would sometimes find themselves surrounded by light, with trails of brightness following the hull or patches of sea shimmering as if lit from below. As noted in the chapter on living light, these displays are often caused by bioluminescent plankton and other microscopic organisms that emit light when disturbed. To sailors with no knowledge of biology, these glowing waters seem to signal the presence of vast, unseen creatures, perhaps with luminous skin, or eyes the size of lanterns, keeping pace with the ship in the darkness. Even the ocean's temperature and chemistry could create illusions. Sharp boundaries called density fronts, where warm and cold water masses meet, can produce strange visual effects. From the deck of a ship, these fronts sometimes look like lines of motion or shifting bodies beneath the surface. Sailors describe them as giant serpents gliding just below the waves, their backs stretching for miles. In reality, these were simply the visible edges of water masses, with different properties flowing alongside one another. Such events were not rare. They were part of the everyday reality of life at sea. Yet they were so unpredictable and so powerful that they seemed to defy explanation. Before the rise of modern science, people relied on the tools they had: imagination, stories, and the language of myth to make sense of the unknown. A rogue wave that swallowed a ship whole became the thrash of a colossal beast. A whirlpool that dragged a vessel downward was reimagined as the gaping mouth of a leviathan. A sudden boil in the water became the stirring of a sleeping serpent. These stories were not foolishness. They were attempts to understand a vast and often hostile environment with limited knowledge, and they often captured the essence of the real phenomena, even if the explanations were wrong. And while we now know the science behind these events, they remain as dramatic and unpredictable as they ever were. The ocean still rises without warning. It still spins, churns, and shifts in ways that seem alive. And in those moments, it is easy to understand why those who came before us believed that something immense was moving beneath the waves. Beneath the weight of miles of water, where sunlight cannot reach and pressure crushes anything unprepared for its grip, Earth hides a vast and alien world. It is a realm colder, darker, and more mysterious than any desert or distant planet we have explored. For centuries, it was believed to be barren, a void too hostile to sustain anything beyond the simplest forms of life. But as our eyes and instruments have probed deeper into this abyss, a different story has emerged, one filled with creatures so large and so strange that they defy expectation. Even now, in an age of satellites and deep-diving robots, we are still discovering giants in the deep. Among the most breathtaking of these discoveries is a jellyfish so elusive that for over a century it was known only from a handful of sightings. Stygiomedusa gigantea is as much apparition as animal, its bell as wide as a dining table and its trailing arms stretching over 30 feet in length. Unlike most jellyfish, it has no stinging tentacles. Instead, it drifts silently through the midwater, its long, ribbon-like arms sweeping plankton and small animals into its mouth as it glides. Its body glows a deep crimson, a color that vanishes completely in the dim light of the deep ocean, rendering it almost invisible. For generations, it evaded human study, its soft tissues too delicate for nets, its home too deep for divers. Only with the arrival of remotely operated vehicles and high-definition cameras have we begun to see it alive, moving slowly and deliberately through the darkness like a living tapestry. Even more astonishing is a creature that seems to rewrite the very definition of animal. Siphonophores, members of the same group as jellyfish and corals, are not single organisms but colonies, composed of thousands of genetically identical units, each performing a specific task. Together, they function as one. In 2020, scientists exploring a deep canyon off the coast of Western Australia filmed one of these colonies, stretching an estimated 120 to 150 feet in length, longer than any whale ever measured. Suspended like a glowing spiral in the dark, It pulsed and twisted as it moved, a coordinated living network drifting silently through the abyss. Each segment was alive, yet none could survive alone. It was not an individual animal, but a community acting as a single, immense predator. The deep sea encourages gigantism in ways that still puzzle scientists. The cold, crushing pressures slow metabolism, allowing animals to grow for far longer than they could in shallower waters. The scarcity of food rewards size, as larger bodies can store energy and travel farther to find prey. Even small crustaceans transform in these conditions. Amphipods that scurry around tide pools near the surface rarely grow larger than a grain of rice, but in the huddle depths beyond 6,000 feet, their relatives swell to the size of a human hand. Isopods, kin to the tiny pill bugs that roll up beneath rocks on land, balloon into armored giants over 2 feet long, creeping slowly across the seafloor like living tanks. Not all deep sea giants are invertebrates. In the icy waters of the North Atlantic and Arctic, Greenland sharks reign as some of the most enigmatic predators on Earth. These slow moving sharks, which can live for more than 4 centuries, reach lengths of 5 to 7 meters, rivaling the size of great whites. They drift through the twilight zones and bathypelagic depths, scavenging whale carcasses and preying on fish and seals. Their metabolism is so slow that they can go months between meals, and their movements are so languid that they have been described as ghosts of the deep. Yet, despite their pace, they are perfectly adapted for a world where patience is more important than speed. Other fish are stranger still. Deep diving cameras have captured footage of unusually large ophidiids, elongated, ribbon like fish from the cusk eel family, drifting through the mesopelagic and bathypelagic zones. Their taxonomy is still unresolved, but their length and body structure suggest adaptations for a life spent in near total darkness, where slow, undulating movement conserves precious energy. Each new observation hints at an ecosystem we have only just begun to understand. What makes these discoveries remarkable is not only their size but their timing. They are not relics of the distant past or fossils reimagined by science. They are alive now, evolving and thriving in a realm that covers the vast majority of our planet, yet remains almost completely unexplored. For centuries, myths spoke of enormous shapes rising from the depths, of creatures longer than ships and larger than houses. Today, we know that those stories were not entirely unfounded. Stygiomedusa may have inspired legends of glowing sea spirits. Siphonophores, mistaken for a single massive serpent, could easily account for tales of creatures stretching beyond the length of a sailing vessel. And a Greenland shark, drifting silently beneath a boat, might explain stories of shadowy monsters lurking in the deep. The more we learn, the clearer it becomes that Earth's greatest unknowns are not beyond the stars but beneath the waves. Our most advanced submersibles have visited only a fraction of the seafloor. Vast trenches, seamount chains, and abyssal plains remain completely unexplored. And if the giants we have found so far are any indication, many more extraordinary species are waiting in the darkness, their existence unrecorded, their size unimaginable. Each new discovery is a reminder that the ocean is not a closed chapter of Earth's story, but one still being written. The giants of the deep are not extinct monsters from a forgotten age. They are living evidence that life continues to adapt and expand in ways we have yet to comprehend, and that some of the most extraordinary creatures on this planet are still hiding, far below, beyond the reach of light, far beneath the waves, in a realm where sunlight has never reached, and the weight of water builds layer upon layer. Like a living mountain, the rules of life begin to shift. Down here, scale itself bends to the will of physics. Creatures that would be tiny in shallower waters grow immense, stretching the limits of form and physiology. This striking pattern, known as deep sea gigantism, is not a coincidence or a quirk of nature. It is the predictable result of powerful forces shaping evolution over millions of years. As recent discoveries show, size follows the physics. The first of those forces is pressure. Every meter of water above exerts its weight on what lies below, and by the time you reach 10,000 feet, that weight is more than 300 times greater than the air pressing on us at the surface. Such pressure would crush most land-dwelling life. Yet organisms in the deep sea have not only adapted to it, they have used it to their advantage. Their bodies are often soft and gelatinous, flexible enough to yield under pressure rather than resist it. This adaptation slows their metabolisms, reducing the need for rapid bursts of energy and allowing them to channel resources into slow, steady growth over long spans of time. Instead of racing to maturity, many deep sea animals take decades, even centuries, to reach their full size. The result is a world where bigger bodies are not just possible, but often inevitable. Temperature adds another layer to this story. The deep ocean is cold, often just a few degrees above freezing. This cold slows life's chemical reactions, extending lifespans and delaying reproduction. A slow pace of life is a powerful ally in the pursuit of size. Organisms that live longer have more time to grow, and those that grow slowly often reach sizes impossible for fast-living creatures near the surface. Cold water also holds more dissolved oxygen, a crucial ingredient for building large bodies. Oxygen fuels metabolism and tissue growth, and in the deep sea's chill, there is enough of it to support vast, energy-demanding anatomies. Together, pressure and cold create a biological environment where the slow accumulation of size is not only possible but advantageous. Buoyancy plays its part as well. On land, gravity is a strict enforcer of limits. A body that grows too large must support its own weight, and bones, muscles, and tissues eventually reach a point where they can no longer bear the load. In water, those constraints fade. The ocean cradles the body, lifting and supporting it, allowing life to grow beyond what gravity alone would allow. This is why the largest animal ever to exist, the blue whale, lives in the ocean. It is why colossal squids can stretch their limbs to extraordinary lengths without collapsing under their own weight. The water itself is a silent partner in gigantism, freeing evolution to explore sizes that would be impossible on land. But the story does not end with physical support. Food scarcity in the deep ocean is another key driver of size. The abyss is a desert of sorts, where energy arrives only as a slow rain of organic debris from the surface or the occasional bounty of a sinking carcass. In such an environment, large size becomes a survival strategy. Bigger animals can travel farther to search for food, storing more energy in their tissues when they find it. They can survive longer between meals, endure lean periods, and dominate scarce resources. Large predators can also afford to hunt less frequently, targeting bigger prey and conserving precious energy in a world where opportunities to feed are rare. Even for scavengers, size is a competitive advantage, allowing them to muscle smaller rivals aside when a rare feast drifts down from above. Another subtler factor is the economics of energy itself. Larger animals lose heat more slowly and move more efficiently over long distances. They can exploit low-frequency feeding strategies, consuming fewer but larger meals, and storing surplus energy in fat reserves. This strategy is particularly valuable in the deep, where unpredictability is the rule, and feasts may be separated by months or years. In this way, Gigantism becomes a form of insurance, a biological hedge against scarcity. Even oxygen availability shapes the giants that thrive below. In the frigid, oxygen rich water, respiration becomes more efficient, allowing large animals to sustain their metabolisms without exhausting their supply. Some researchers believe that ancient oceans, richer in oxygen than those today, may have supported even larger life forms, and the abundance of oxygen in modern deep water may still help fuel the extraordinary sizes we observe there. Every giant of the deep is a living equation, a product of pressure, temperature, buoyancy, scarcity, oxygen, and time. Each factor alone shapes biology, but together they create a world where size is not just possible, but inevitable. The colossal squid's immense eyes are tuned to the faintest flicker of movement. The Greenland shark's slow, patient metabolism allows it to live for centuries in icy darkness. Even the delicate, ghost like siphonophores that drift for over 100 feet through the black water are shaped by these same forces. The ocean's giants are not accidents or anomalies. They are the expected outcome of physics and evolution intertwining over millions of years. The deeper we explore, the more clearly we see that size is not a luxury in the abyss. It is a necessity written into the fabric of life by the weight of water, the chill of darkness, and the hunger that defines existence in the deep. And with each new descent into the unknown, we glimpse how profoundly the environment itself sculpts the living world, not just in form, but in scale. Long before satellites could trace the edges of continents or sonar could sweep the ocean floor, the known world ended abruptly in ink and parchment. Early maps were not just tools for navigation, they were acts of storytelling, attempts to capture a world only partly understood, and at the edges of that understanding, where the horizon dissolved into mystery, the imagination took over. The seas that lay beyond familiar coastlines were often not empty spaces on these charts, but teeming realms of danger and wonder filled with creatures that might or might not exist. Some of the earliest maps, created in the medieval and Renaissance periods, were closer to illuminated manuscripts than the scientific charts we know today. Landmasses were drawn in rough, sometimes distorted shapes, their proportions guided more by hearsay than by measurement. But what truly set these maps apart was what appeared in the spaces where knowledge ran out. In those vast, blank stretches of ocean, artists and cartographers filled the void with monstrous life. Coils of enormous serpents twisted between the waves. Fish with gaping maws and dragon-like heads lunged at wooden ships. Horned creatures and winged leviathans breached from the depths, often in dramatic scenes of battle against sailors. It is often said that maps from this era were marked with the phrase, "Here be dragons." In truth, that phrase appears rarely, if at all, on surviving charts. Yet the impulse behind it was widespread. When knowledge ended, the mapmakers filled the unknown with danger, and they often chose to draw that danger as beasts. The symbolism was clear. Past this point, human understanding faltered. Beyond this edge, the ocean was unpredictable, perhaps even alive. Explorers returning from distant voyages fueled this blend of myth and geography. They spoke of islands that seemed to move beneath their ships, which we now recognize as whales surfacing for air. They described enormous shadows gliding silently beneath the water, too big to be fish and too swift to be land. Lacking the scientific tools to explain what they had witnessed, sailors reached for the language they knew, that of monsters and spirits. And when those stories reached the hands of cartographers, they were transformed into warnings painted across the margins of the world. One of the most striking examples of this tradition is the Carta Marina, created by the Swedish priest and scholar Olaus Magnus in 1539. In its depiction of the northern seas, every expanse of water seems alive. Sea serpents coil around the masts of ships, vast whales rear up from the deep, scattering sailors into the waves. A lobster like creature drags men beneath the surface. These illustrations were not intended merely to entertain, they were cautionary markers, born from reports of real animals described without the benefit of biology or zoology. A breaching whale, a pod of orcas, or even a giant squid glimpsed briefly before disappearing into the depths could easily become, through the filter of fear and imagination, the monstrous figures etched into the map. For people who never left their ports, these depictions were their only window into the unknown. Most would never sail beyond the horizon, and so their understanding of the sea came from the stories travelers told and the images cartographers drew. As a result, the ocean was not imagined as a vast pathway connecting distant lands, but as a dangerous realm in its own right. Its waters were filled with predators. Its surface could hide lurking dangers. Even states and empires planning naval expeditions prepared for the possibility of creatures they had never seen. Ships carried weapons and harpoons, not only for defense against pirates or enemy fleets, but for what they believed might emerge from the deep. As navigation improved and more of the world's coastlines were charted, the monsters on maps did not disappear. They changed. By the 17th century, fantastical dragons and serpents gave way to more realistic but still exaggerated creatures. Whales and sharks replaced sea serpents, often drawn attacking ships or swallowing sailors whole. Some maps included brief notes describing these animals' supposed behaviors, warning that one beast capsizes ships with its tail, while another swallows entire crews. These illustrations reflected a growing body of observation, but also a persistent need to personify danger in physical form. The purpose of these images was not simply to dramatize the unknown. They were also practical warnings. Monsters marked regions where storms were frequent, where currents shifted unpredictably, where icebergs drifted under low fog. They symbolized hazards that could not yet be mapped with precision. And in doing so, they revealed a deeper truth about the mindset of the time, that where knowledge ended, imagination filled the gap. The influence of those old monster-filled charts lingers even now. We no longer decorate our maps with coiled serpents or breaching whales, but the impulse to populate the unknown with possibility remains. It echoes in the language we use to describe unexplored parts of the deep sea and in the enduring fascination with creatures that might still dwell in its black waters. The cartographers of centuries past, with their vivid depictions of beasts and their cryptic warnings, captured something essential about the human relationship with mystery. Faced with a blank space, we tell stories. Faced with the unknown, we imagine life within it. And so, the oceans of those ancient maps were never empty. They were filled with speculation, with the fears and hopes of those who stood at the edge of the known world and gazed out into the void. Every coiling serpent and gaping mouth inked into the margins was more than decoration. It was a reflection of the questions humanity has always asked when staring into darkness. What lies beyond what we can see, and what might be watching us from the other side? Across the long arc of human history, stories have always been more mobile than the people who first spoke them. They drifted across rivers and deserts with migrating clans, sailed with voyagers who never saw land for months, and survived for thousands of years in songs and oral traditions long after their original storytellers had vanished. And among those stories, none traveled quite so far or appeared so often as those about creatures rising from the sea. They surfaced again and again in places separated by oceans, by languages, and by time, told by people who had no contact with one another. Yet the shape of the story was always familiar, something vast and alive stirring beneath the waves, revealing itself only long enough to leave behind terror, reverence, or awe. In the far north, where icy fjords cut through the rugged coastlines of Scandinavia, sailors spoke of the kraken. The sagas described it as a colossal, many limbed creature lurking in deep waters, its tentacles powerful enough to pull ships under with ease. Danish writers in later centuries claimed that, when the kraken rose, it created whirlpools large enough to swallow entire fleets. These accounts were not isolated sailors' tales. They were repeated in royal reports and natural histories, recorded as if they were facts rather than fiction. And though no one ever caught such a beast, the possibility of its existence was treated as real enough to shape navigation routes and maritime caution for generations. Far to the east, across the wide Pacific, Japanese fishermen feared a figure known as the umibozu. They said it appeared suddenly on calm nights, a towering black silhouette rising silently beside their boats. If angered, it could summon waves so large they capsized entire crews. In some versions of the story, the umibozu asked sailors impossible questions, and those who failed to answer correctly vanished beneath the water. To the fishermen who depended on the sea, this was more than a tale. It was a warning wrapped in metaphor. Respect the ocean's moods, or it will turn against you. Thousands of miles to the south, in the warm waters of Polynesia, stories told of the Taniwha, powerful beings that guarded river mouths and ocean passages. Some Taniwha were described as protective spirits, guiding canoes safely through treacherous waters. Others were violent and vengeful, attacking those who disrespected the sea or entered sacred places uninvited. These legends were deeply specific, tied to real locations where strong currents, hidden reefs, or shifting tides posed real dangers. Generations of navigators memorized the stories as part of their training, not because they believed in monsters, but because the tales contained practical knowledge disguised as myth. And in the sunlit waters of the Mediterranean, ancient Greek sailors told of Ketos, the sea monster sent by Poseidon to punish kingdoms or devour ships. The most famous of these stories was that of Andromeda, who was chained to a rock as a sacrifice to Ketos before being saved by Perseus. Art and literature portrayed Ketos as a vast serpent or whale-like creature, part dragon, part fish, its body coiled around the horizon. It was a physical embodiment of the dangers of the open sea, a reminder that beyond the sight of land, humans were at the mercy of forces far larger than themselves. The similarities between these myths are striking, and they emerge despite vast distances and cultural divides. Each speaks of a creature that rises without warning, commands the sea itself, and tests those who venture too far from shore. The names differ, but the underlying shape is the same. These stories did not spread simply by word of mouth. Many arose independently, shaped by shared experiences of a powerful and unpredictable ocean. Encounters with real creatures almost certainly fueled many of these legends. Giant squid, with eyes larger than dinner plates and tentacles stretching many meters, match descriptions of both the kraken and Ketos. Massive oarfish, sometimes longer than 10 meters, have likely inspired serpent myths from Japan to the Mediterranean. Even the sudden breach of a whale could create the impression of a monstrous form rising from below, especially to sailors who had never seen such animals before. The human mind, always seeking patterns, filled in the rest. But these myths may also have roots that stretch far deeper into time than any written record. Long before ships existed, coastal peoples relied on the sea for food and survival. They watched strange shapes appear offshore, found enormous carcasses washed up after storms, and saw the surface churn for reasons they could not explain. These experiences were shared across generations, each retelling blurring the line between observation and imagination. By the time they were written down, the events themselves had faded into memory, but the essence of the story remained intact. The parallels grow even stronger when we look beyond these four cultures. The Maori of Aotearoa spoke of water-dwelling dragons that carved channels through the land. The Inuit told of colossal beings moving beneath the ice, their passage shaking the frozen sea. Along the coasts of West Africa, myths described serpents so large they could swallow ships whole. All of these stories arose independently, yet all describe the same relationship: humanity's smallness before the vastness of the sea. The ocean was the one constant that connected all people, and it was the ocean itself that told these stories. Its sudden moods, its hidden inhabitants, its unpredictable violence, all were woven into myth because they were shared human experiences. And as people in every corner of the world tried to make sense of what they saw, they arrived, again and again, at the same conclusion: something powerful lives beneath the waves. Listening to such stories has, at times, led to real finds. Many animals once dismissed as myths, the giant squid, the coelacanth, even the colossal oarfish, turned out to exist after all. Each rediscovery reminds us that the line between legend and reality is thinner than we think, and that within humanity's oldest sea stories, there may still be truths waiting to be uncovered. For as long as humans have told stories, there has been a delicate space where imagination and science meet. It is a place where legends linger long after skepticism has dismissed them, where accounts dismissed as fantasy sometimes resurface as fact. Many of the creatures now accepted as part of the natural world began their journeys as myths, dismissed by scientists until evidence forced a reevaluation. That borderland between story and science has a name: cryptozoology. It is often treated with suspicion, but history shows that curiosity about the unknown, even when born from rumor, has sometimes led to remarkable discoveries. One of the clearest examples is the story of the giant squid. For centuries, sailors described monstrous, tentacled beings rising from the deep, wrapping their arms around ships and dragging them into the sea. The tales were dramatic, filled with descriptions of enormous eyes and violent struggles, and most scientists of the time considered them seafarers' exaggerations. There was, after all, no physical proof that such a creature existed, but scattered pieces of evidence slowly began to surface. Deep scars in the skin of sperm whales bore the unmistakable imprint of giant suction cups. Fragments of enormous tentacles washed ashore after storms. And in the late 19th century, entire carcasses began appearing on coastlines, too large and too strange to dismiss. By the early 21st century, cameras had finally captured living specimens in their natural habitat, gliding silently through the deep like colossal phantoms. They were real: Architeuthis ducks, animals stretching more than 40 feet long, their eyes the size of dinner plates, and perfectly adapted to the darkness. What had once been a terrifying sailor's tale became a documented species, proving that even the most unlikely legends can reflect reality. This transformation from rumor to fact is not unique to the oceans. Deep within the rainforests of Central Africa, for example, local communities spoke for generations of a shy, elusive forest animal with the build of a giraffe but the stripes of a zebra. Western scientists dismissed the idea outright, yet explorers who took those stories seriously began to find clues: hoofprints in the mud, scraps of hide, even glimpses of the animal itself. In 1901, science confirmed what local people had known all along. The okapi was real, a living relative of the giraffe hidden in dense jungles where few outsiders had ever ventured. Perhaps the most dramatic story of all comes from the fossil record. The coelacanth, a lobe-finned fish known only from fossils, was believed to have gone extinct more than 60 million years ago. It was a symbol of vanished worlds, a relic from a time before humans existed. But in 1938, a South African fisherman pulled a strange, heavy-bodied fish from his net, one that matched the fossilized remains exactly. Scientists were stunned. The coelacanth was alive, a survivor from an age when dinosaurs still roamed the earth. Further expeditions would find more of them, living quietly in deep waters off the coasts of Africa and Indonesia, unchanged for millions of years. These discoveries show why the boundary between myth and science is worth exploring. Myths often contain small fragments of truth, distorted through centuries of retelling. Local knowledge, passed down through oral traditions, can encode observations that science has yet to verify, but stories alone are not enough. For a discovery to move from legend into the scientific record, it must meet strict standards. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, not just anecdotes or blurry photographs, but physical specimens, clear images with scale, or repeated detections that can be independently verified. Without such evidence, claims remain unproven, no matter how compelling they may sound. This is where most cryptids, the creatures of cryptozoology, remain. Despite countless reports, there is still no verified specimen of a lake monster hundreds of feet long, no confirmed evidence of humanoid primates in remote forests, and no solid proof of massive sea serpents. Many of these stories likely arise from misidentifications of known animals, illusions created by waves and light, or the powerful human tendency to see patterns where none exist. Yet the process of investigating them is not wasted effort. In pursuing such reports, scientists have often stumbled upon new species, documented previously unknown behaviors, and deepened our understanding of ecosystems. The conversation between myth and science is not one of conflict but of collaboration. Myths keep curiosity alive, sending explorers to the farthest reaches of the sea and the most remote corners of the forest. Science brings the discipline needed to test those myths against reality. Sometimes, that process leads to disappointment, revealing that a story is only a story. But other times, it leads to breakthroughs that reshape our understanding of life on Earth. The lesson is simple but profound. The unknown is always larger than we think. The okapi hid in plain sight. The coelacanth outlived the dinosaurs. The giant squid haunted the ocean depths for centuries before anyone saw it alive, and it is likely that more surprises remain species still unknown to science, their existence hinted at only in the stories people tell. Following those stories with patience and rigor is not chasing fantasy. It is part of the long tradition of exploration that has always driven science forward. Some tips now come not from tales, but from sensors. As technology advances, satellites, sonar, and deep-sea drones now pick up signals of life we have never seen, offering new leads for discovery. Just as myths once guided exploration, these modern clues point the way toward the next great revelations still hiding in the deep. Beneath the waves, beyond the reach of light, the ocean hides a world we have barely begun to understand. It is Earth's oldest and most enduring wilderness, stretching over 2/3 of the planet's surface and plunging miles into darkness, where pressure is immense and time moves differently. For all our ships, sensors, and satellites, most of that realm remains unseen. What we know is scattered and fragmentary, gathered from brief glimpses through tiny windows of exploration. Yet in those scattered fragments, science keeps finding hints that the deep may still hold forms of life beyond anything we have yet encountered. Exploring this vast, concealed realm is not simply a matter of will. The challenges are profound. At depths of several miles, water pressure crushes metal, light fades entirely, and temperatures hover just above freezing. Even the most advanced submersibles can investigate only a small patch of seabed in a single journey, a cone of light sweeping across a darkness that stretches for thousands of miles. The sheer scale of the ocean compounds the difficulty. There are nearly 300 million cubic miles of water on this planet, and much of it lies beyond the reach of routine study. Scientists describe their efforts as trying to understand a forest by peering through a single tree trunk. And yet, each time we manage to peer deeper, the ocean surprises us. Remote cameras have revealed creatures so alien that they defy classification. Crimson jellyfish with bodies like drifting planets, predatory worms that glow with internal light, and delicate siphonophores extending for more than 100 feet, like living threads woven from the fabric of the abyss. In 2017, researchers exploring the Mariana Trench filmed a transparent, balloon like creature unlike anything in existing taxonomies, a living enigma that moves with the gentlest undulations. Such discoveries hint that there is far more awaiting us below, perhaps even life that challenges the boundaries of what we think is possible. The idea that enormous, undiscovered animals might exist in those depths is not just a product of fantasy. It arises from measurable gaps in the ocean's food webs. Every ecosystem is built on the transfer of energy from prey to predator. And when scientists study those transfers in the deep sea, they find places where the balance does not add up. In some regions, prey populations are abundant enough to sustain predators much larger or more numerous than any species we have cataloged. Something is feeding there, something powerful enough to leave a measurable absence, but we have yet to see it. Acoustic data adds another layer of intrigue. Modern sonar instruments, which map the seafloor and detect movement within the water column, sometimes register echoes that resist easy explanation. Large, slow-moving returns have been detected at depths greater than 10,000 feet, their signatures too substantial for schools of fish and too unusual for known whales or squid. Scientists emphasize that sonar is an imperfect tool. Such readings may represent aggregations of smaller animals clustered tightly together, unusual density layers, or even artifacts of water temperature and salinity. Yet the possibility remains that some of these signals point to organisms larger or stranger than any we have yet observed. Clues also come from the behavior of species we already know. Sperm whales, the ocean's largest toothed predators, routinely dive thousands of feet into darkness to hunt prey that has never been witnessed directly. They often return to the surface bearing scars that cannot easily be explained, marks larger and deeper than those caused by any known squid species. These wounds are not proof of new giants, but they are evidence of struggles in the dark, fought against opponents still beyond our sight. History shows that such mysteries are worth pursuing. The giant squid, once dismissed as a sailor's fantasy, was not filmed alive until 2004. The coelacanth, known only from fossils and thought to have vanished 60 million years ago, turned up unexpectedly in a fishing net in 1938. Both creatures had been present all along, hidden in plain sight within the deep's vastness, their existence betrayed only by subtle clues. There is no reason to assume that similar surprises do not still await discovery. Technological advances are now pushing exploration further than ever before. Autonomous vehicles can drift through the water column for months, quietly recording data from regions once unreachable. New submersibles are designed to withstand pressures that would have destroyed earlier models, carrying cameras, sensors, and instruments deep into the Hadal trenches. These tools are revealing ecosystems that were entirely unknown just decades ago. Fields of tube worms flourishing around hydrothermal vents, forests of glass sponges clinging to undersea mountains, and organisms that thrive without sunlight, drawing energy from the planet's chemical heart. What remains concealed is likely not just small or delicate. The ocean's immensity provides room for entire ecosystems, vast food webs, and possibly organisms whose size or form we cannot yet predict. Some may move too slowly to be noticed by current instruments. Others may live so deep or in such remote expanses that no camera has yet crossed their path. The evidence is indirect sonar echoes, unexplained scars, missing links in energy budgets, but it is enough to suggest that the deep still has stories left to tell. Far below the waves, in the quiet and crushing blackness, life has been evolving for hundreds of millions of years with almost no scrutiny from above. It is possible that creatures of staggering scale glide through those waters, even now, unseen and unstudied, their existence hinted at only by faint traces. Perhaps they have been there all along, moving slowly through a world that has remained hidden from us, waiting for the day when our technology and our curiosity reach deep enough to finally reveal them. The fear of deep water reaches farther back than memory. It stirs in us like an echo from a time before language, a faint, instinctive signal that hums beneath our thoughts whenever we look into dark, endless water. Scientists have a name for this response: thalassophobia. It is more than a fear of drowning or being stranded at sea. It is a deeper unease, a tension that rises from knowing we are out of our element, that below the surface is a world we cannot control, cannot breathe in, and cannot easily escape. To understand why stories of sea monsters appear in every culture and every era, we have to understand the mind that created them, a mind shaped by uncertainty, vulnerability, and the need to make sense of what it cannot see. Researchers propose that caution around deep, dark, and uncontrolled environments may have conferred survival advantages to our ancestors. For early humans, attention to potential threats was not optional, it was essential. Those who were quick to recognize danger and hesitant to expose themselves to risk were more likely to live long enough to pass on their genes, and few environments presented more risk than the ocean. Beneath its surface, vision fails, movement becomes slow and clumsy, breathing becomes impossible. Even in shallow water, we lose much of the control that protects us on land. In deeper water, we are almost powerless. That powerlessness lingers within us, etched into our nervous systems by countless generations that learned, often brutally, to treat the sea with respect. It is not a baseless fear. Long before humans appeared, the oceans were home to predators far larger and stronger than anything on land. Giant sharks, enormous marine reptiles, and vast predatory fish ruled these waters. Even today, the largest and most capable hunters on the planet, orcas, great white sharks, sperm whales, remain at home in the sea. A human floating at the surface is a fragile, clumsy intruder in their domain. We may never have faced these threats directly as a species, but our ancestors and their ancestors before them lived in a world shaped by them. The result is a subtle but persistent wariness of deep water, a biological memory of being prey. But fear alone does not explain why we imagine monsters. The ocean's immensity also invites our minds to complete the picture. Human perception is tuned to fill in gaps when information is incomplete, a process psychologists call pattern completion. It is the reason we see shapes in clouds or faces in the dark. In the open sea, where light fades after a few feet and the bottom lies miles below, the gaps are enormous. A ripple on the surface might be nothing more than a breeze, yet our minds can transform it into the outline of a lurking creature. A shadow passing beneath a boat might be a school of fish, yet our imaginations supply a single, immense body stretching far into the dark. The ocean's emptiness gives the mind room to build whatever it fears most. This tendency explains why so many myths mirror one another, even across cultures that never met. When sailors spoke of the kraken's vast arms rising from the depths, they were giving shape to the formless fear of what might be lurking below. When villagers told stories of serpents winding through the waves, they were expressing the unease of watching the sea's surface shift with no clear cause. These tales were not mere superstition, they were our ancestors' way of making sense of what they could not measure or see. The tension between fear and curiosity has shaped the course of human exploration. For thousands of years, people hesitated to cross vast stretches of water, imagining monsters waiting beyond the horizon. Maps filled the uncharted ocean with drawings of serpents and dragons. Even seasoned sailors carried those fears with them into new seas, avoiding certain routes because of the stories that clung to them. The unknown had teeth, and even the bravest explorers sailed with one eye on the water, wondering what might rise from below. That instinct has not disappeared. Even with sonar to map the seafloor and submersibles to carry us into the abyss, the unease remains. Divers report a primal anxiety when descending into black water, a sense of trespassing into another world. Swimmers in deep lakes often describe the same thing, the irrational but powerful conviction that something is down there, watching. It is as if the mere presence of the unknown is enough to set off the same alarms that once kept our ancestors alive. Yet this same wariness is part of what drives us forward. Curiosity and caution are two sides of the same instinct. The same fear that keeps us from leaping blindly into the deep also compels us to understand it. Every myth about a sea monster is also a question about what lies beneath, about what we have yet to discover, about how much we still do not know. That question has sent ships across oceans, probes to the seafloor, and cameras into the abyss. The monsters we imagine are not just reflections of the sea, they are reflections of ourselves, our vulnerability, our pattern seeking minds, our restless need to understand. They grow out of ancient instincts shaped by real dangers, but they also fuel the curiosity that pulls us toward those same dangers. The deep water still unsettles us, as it always has, and perhaps that is why, even now, we cannot stop peering into it, searching for shapes in the dark. Even in an age when satellites sweep the skies and autonomous vehicles roam the seabed, the ocean still speaks in riddles. It hums and groans and thunders in ways that science cannot always explain. Strange sounds rise from its depths and travel thousands of miles through the water. Shapes flicker across sonar screens and then disappear. Shadows drift past cameras, too fleeting to identify, leaving behind only questions. For every mystery solved, dozens more emerge, each reminding us that the ocean remains the most enigmatic realm on Earth. Some of the most puzzling clues do not come from what we see, but from what we hear. In the summer of 1997, scientists at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration were monitoring underwater microphones, hydrophones originally built to track submarines, when they recorded something unlike anything they had heard before. It was deep and resonant, a powerful sound that rose quickly in pitch, and it was so loud that hydrophones more than 3,000 miles apart picked it up. The researchers gave it a simple name, the bloop. At first, Many wondered if it might be biological. The acoustic signature of the bloop shared similarities with the vocalizations of large marine animals, but it was far louder than any known creature, including the blue whale. For a time, speculation ran wild. If the bloop was alive, whatever produced it would have to be immense, perhaps larger than any animal in the fossil record. Others suspected a geological cause, such as an iceberg scraping along the seafloor or fracturing as it broke apart. Over time, more evidence tilted the scale toward the latter explanation. NOAA now attributes the bloop primarily to ice-related seismic activity, sometimes called icequakes. When enormous masses of ice crack, shift, or collide, particularly in Antarctica's coastal waters, they can release bursts of acoustic energy strong enough to be heard across an ocean basin. The bloop, once thought by some to be the voice of a sea monster, now appears to be the sound of ice itself moving under immense pressure. It is far from the only mysterious sound the ocean has offered. In 1999, a signal nicknamed Julia was recorded, lasting nearly 15 seconds and strong enough to resonate across the entire Pacific. Like the bloop, Julia's origin remains uncertain, though many scientists suspect it was caused by the disintegration of a massive iceberg. Another recurring signal, called upsweep, has been detected every spring and autumn since 1991. Its regularity suggests a geophysical cause, possibly linked to hydrothermal vents or volcanic activity on the seafloor. Though their exact origins remain debated, these sounds are valuable scientific breadcrumbs, revealing dynamic processes far below the waves that we still do not fully understand. Even more enigmatic are the signals that do not fit any known pattern. Sonar operators sometimes detect enormous, slow-moving shapes at depths of more than 10,000 feet, shapes too large and too deliberate to be ordinary schools of fish. These acoustic anomalies could be caused by unusual aggregations of smaller organisms or by layers of water with different temperatures and densities bending the sound waves in unexpected ways. Yet they persist as tantalizing hints that there may be life forms or phenomena we have yet to encounter directly. Cameras, too, occasionally capture things that science cannot easily categorize. In 2020, a remotely operated vehicle exploring the deep sea off South America filmed a vast, translucent structure drifting silently through the darkness. Its form shifted and rippled like a living cloud. Some experts suggested it might be a siphonophore, a colonial organism made up of countless tiny individuals working as one. Others proposed it was an entirely new species, one adapted to the abyss in ways we have never imagined. Without a specimen in hand, its identity remains unresolved. The deeper we explore, the clearer it becomes that many of these mysteries likely have natural explanations. Icebergs grinding against one another can generate astonishing sounds. Underwater volcanoes release pulses of energy that echo like thunder through the depths. Swarms of plankton and krill can behave collectively in ways that fool sonar into detecting a single massive entity. Yet each discovery opens new questions rather than closing them. Why do some signals repeat seasonally while others occur only once? What accounts for the strange acoustic blobs that move independently of known currents? Why do some regions show signs of large predators that have never been seen? Such puzzles remind us how much of the ocean remains beyond our reach. Light vanishes within a few hundred feet of the surface, and pressure multiplies with every meter below. Exploration is slow and costly, and even the most advanced robotic submersibles can only survey small areas at a time. What we know is a sliver compared to what remains hidden. Yet, this uncertainty is part of the story itself. The unexplained signals and fleeting glimpses are not failures of science but invitations. They tell us that the deep ocean is active and dynamic, shaped by forces we still struggle to measure. They hint that new species, new behaviors, and new phenomena await discovery, tucked away in the planet's most inaccessible corners. The ocean still guards many of its secrets behind a curtain of darkness and distance. It speaks in sounds that travel across basins, hides shapes too faint to capture, and offers only glimpses of lives that exist beyond the limits of light. Each mystery is a fragment of a larger story, one that continues to unfold, slowly and quietly, far beneath the waves. Long before the first scientist peered through a telescope or lowered a probe into the deep sea, humans turned to stories to explain the strange and unpredictable forces around them. These stories were not idle inventions or diversions. They were attempts to make sense of the unknown, crafted with the best tools our ancestors had: observation, memory, and imagination. They were humanity's earliest ways of turning confusion into explanation, a first draft of the scientific process. A hypothesis, after all, is simply a story stated so it can be tested. The world of early humans was filled with phenomena that defied understanding. The ground could lurch and split beneath their feet. Mountains could belch fire and ash into the sky. Rivers could rise without warning, swallowing entire settlements. In the absence of geology, meteorology, and physics, these events felt like the work of something conscious and deliberate. People imagined that great beings were behind them, weaving stories that captured both the terror and the mystery of nature's power. A volcano might be the breath of an angry spirit. An earthquake could be the thrashing of a colossal beast buried beneath the earth. Even the tides were explained as the movements of a serpent, coiling and uncoiling in the deep. These were not mistakes so much as frameworks, ways to give chaotic forces a cause, and, in doing so, to begin searching for patterns. Many such stories mirrored reality more closely than they might first appear. In ancient Japan, people told of namazu, a giant catfish that stirred whenever it moved, shaking the ground above. Centuries later, science would show that earthquakes originate from deep movements within the Earth's crust, caused by the slow but relentless shifting of tectonic plates. In Greece, the god Poseidon was believed to wield the power of the seas and earthquakes alike. This association captured an essential truth. The same dynamic forces that shaped the land also shaped the oceans, and both could influence the fate of civilizations. Even myths of monsters rising from the sea often began with real encounters. Sailors who spoke of enormous tentacled creatures were likely describing sightings of giant squid, even if their size and ferocity grew in the telling. Reports of serpent-like beings slithering across the waves may have originated with sightings of oarfish long, ribbon-shaped fish that occasionally surface, especially before earthquakes. Myths preserved these observations in a way that could be remembered, repeated, and passed down, even if the language used was metaphorical. These stories were more than attempts to explain. They were also tools for survival. Across the Pacific, oral traditions warned of angry sea gods who punished those who built too close to the shore. Embedded in those tales were real memories of devastating tsunamis, encoded in language that even a child could remember. In some cultures, stories described the sea suddenly retreating before a catastrophic wave arrived. Today, scientists understand this as the drawdown that precedes a tsunami, a critical signal now used in early warning systems. Long before seismographs or emergency sirens, myth served the same purpose, carrying vital knowledge forward through generations. As centuries passed and observation became more systematic, stories began to change shape. They grew more specific, more precise, and more testable. A thunderstorm was no longer just the anger of the gods, it became a phenomenon to be measured and studied. A strange trembling beneath the ground was no longer attributed solely to spirits, but to forces that might be mapped and predicted. Myths, in this sense, were not replaced by science. They evolved into it. They provided a language for the first questions humans ever asked about their world, and those questions, once sharpened and structured, became hypotheses. The parallels between ancient storytelling and modern science are closer than they appear. Both begin with careful observation, both seek patterns where there seems to be chaos, and both require imagination, the ability to propose explanations that reach beyond what is already known. Scientists today still frame their questions as narratives, drawing connections between cause and effect, weaving evidence into explanations, and testing those explanations against reality. The difference is that the stories of science must be tested, refined, and proven before they are accepted. In this way, myths can be seen as the early scaffolding of knowledge. They turned bewildering experiences into patterns that could be remembered. They offered models of how the world might work, models that could later be tested and improved. Even their mistakes had value because they pointed humanity toward deeper questions. And though the language of those stories has changed, myths giving way to models, spirits to forces, monsters to species, the underlying process remains the same. Every scientific discovery still begins with a kind of story, a proposal about how events might be linked, about why something happens the way it does. Each hypothesis is a modern descendant of those first tales told around firelight, crafted not to entertain, but to explain. The storytellers of ancient times were not so different from scientists today. Both seek to understand the unknown, to predict the unpredictable, and to find order in the apparent chaos of nature. In the end, the myths of the past were not errors to be dismissed. They were the first steps toward understanding, the earliest attempts to describe a vast and complicated world in human terms. They show us that curiosity did not begin in a laboratory. It began in stories, stories that tried to make sense of earthquakes and tides, of thunder and fire, of the vast and mysterious sea. And in those stories, we can still trace the earliest outlines of the scientific spirit, a desire to question, to explain, and to test the limits of what we know. Far below the shifting waves and sunlit surface, beneath layers of sediment laid down over millions of years, the ocean holds a record of its own past. It is written not in ink or language, but in stone in the bones of predators that once hunted where continents now stand, in the teeth that fell from the mouths of long-vanished giants, and in the delicate shells of microscopic life that drifted down to rest on the seafloor. Each of these traces is a sentence in Earth's memory, a story preserved in silence, waiting for us to uncover and read it. The process that turns life into record begins quietly, almost invisibly. A creature dies and sinks into the darkness. Scavengers pick the bones clean, currents scatter soft tissue, and the ocean buries what remains. Over centuries, layer upon layer of sediment settles above, pressing down with the weight of time. Minerals infiltrate the bones and teeth, replacing organic material grain by grain. Flesh becomes stone, and what was once alive becomes part of the planet's crust. For millions of years, these relics lie hidden, until tectonic forces lift them into the light or human curiosity drills down to find them. When they do emerge, they reveal worlds almost beyond imagination. In the pale limestone of southern England, the fossilized skeletons of ichthyosaurs offer a glimpse into an ocean that vanished more than 100 million years ago. These marine reptiles, shaped like dolphins but often stretching longer than a school bus, were among the most formidable hunters of their time. Their enormous eyes, some wider than a human head, reveal how they navigated the perpetual twilight of deep waters. Some skeletons show mothers giving birth, proof that these ancient reptiles bore live young in the open sea. Others preserve bite marks from colossal cephalopods, silent evidence of predator prey battles that played out in the darkness. Elsewhere, entire skeletons of mosasaurs, the apex predators of the late Cretaceous seas, lie entombed in rock. These were not slow moving giants, but agile, torpedo shaped hunters, armed with double hinged jaws lined with backward pointing teeth, designed to seize and swallow prey whole. A species known as Tylosaurus grew longer than a city bus and was capable of devouring sharks, ammonites, and even smaller mosasaurs. Their remains, scattered from North America to New Zealand, reveal a time when these reptilian titans ruled warm, shallow seas across the globe. The ocean's fossil record also tells the story of its earliest whales, a lineage still adapting to life in water. In the deserts of Egypt's Fayum Depression, far from any modern shoreline, paleontologists uncovered the elongated bones of Basilosaurus, a serpentine whale from the Eocene epoch. More than 50 feet in length, it used its sharp, conical teeth to prey on large fish and other marine mammals. Nearby, the smaller but powerful Dorodon once swam in the same waters, likely hunted by Basilosaurus itself. These fossils reveal the early stages of whale evolution, a transition from land-dwelling ancestors to fully aquatic hunters that reshaped marine ecosystems. Yet not all of the ocean's secrets are about giants. Tiny foraminifera, microscopic organisms with intricate shells, are abundant in deep-sea sediments and offer detailed records of climate shifts across geological time. Coral reefs preserved in stone capture cycles of warming and cooling, and the remains of ancient plankton species chart changes in ocean chemistry and circulation. Together, these fragments tell a story not only of evolution, but of how life responded to shifting continents, changing atmospheres, and mass extinctions. Some discoveries have rewritten what we thought possible. Deep-sea drilling expeditions have recovered sediment cores that contain the remains of organisms previously unknown to science. Fossilized jaws from extinct lamniform sharks reveal a vast size range beyond what survives today, with some species reaching lengths and proportions that make even modern great whites seem small. Fragments of armored, jawless fish speak of evolutionary experiments that thrived briefly before vanishing, their lineages cut short millions of years before mammals walked the land. There is an irony to many of these finds. Some of the richest fossil beds once lay beneath ancient seas but are now exposed in deserts, mountain ranges, or grasslands. The floor of the Cretaceous oceans now stands high above sea level, its layers split open by erosion and time. In places like the Sahara, the Gobi, or the American Midwest, paleontologists dig into rock that was once a seabed teeming with life, unearthing the bones of animals that swam where dry wind now blows. Despite everything we have learned from these ancient remains, the ocean still guards countless secrets. Most of the seafloor has never been touched by a drill or dredge. Vast regions of deep-sea sediment remain unexplored, their fossil archives intact and undisturbed. Buried within them are records of worlds we have never glimpsed, predators with unfamiliar shapes, food webs structured in ways we have not yet imagined, and evolutionary stories that ended long before our species appeared. Each fossil lifted from the seafloor, whether a tooth from a vanished shark or a microscopic shell no larger than a grain of sand, is a fragment of a story that spans hundreds of millions of years. Together, they allow us to trace the rise and fall of ancient ecosystems, to reconstruct oceans that no longer exist, and to understand how life adapted to an ever changing planet. And with every discovery, they remind us that beneath the waves, the past is not gone, it is simply buried, waiting to be read. Far below the surface, in a realm of crushing pressure and perpetual darkness, an invisible transformation is taking place. For most of human history, the deep ocean remained a place of speculation and story, a world we could describe only in myths, legends, and half glimpsed encounters. Today, that is changing. Humanity is building machines capable of exploring this vast and alien environment, not in brief, costly expeditions, but in systematic, sustained detail. These technologies are not only revealing new creatures and landscapes, they are expanding the very limits of what science can know. Exploring the deep ocean has always been one of the most formidable challenges in science. At depths beyond 6 miles, pressures exceed 1,000 times that at the surface, temperatures hover just above freezing, and sunlight is absent entirely. Communication signals fade in the dense water, and even the most advanced materials are tested to their limits. For centuries, exploration was constrained to crude tools, weighted nets, dredges, and mechanical grabs that could only bring back fragments from the abyss. These early efforts taught us that life existed even in the deep, but they revealed only the faintest outlines of the full picture. Now, new generations of technology are rewriting the story. Among the most transformative are long-endurance autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs. These robotic explorers can spend months beneath the surface without resurfacing, traveling hundreds of miles as they gather data. Equipped with sophisticated sensors, they measure salinity, temperature, and chemistry across vast areas, map complex terrain in fine detail, and even follow plumes from hydrothermal vents to their source. Unlike earlier generations of robotic explorers that needed frequent retrieval, these machines operate continuously, building a dynamic, evolving picture of the deep over time. One of the most exciting frontiers is the use of machine vision in the midwater zone, the vast, dim layer between the surface and the seafloor. Here, visibility is often limited, and many species remain unknown simply because they are too small or too elusive for traditional cameras. Modern AUVs now use artificial intelligence to detect and classify species in real time, identifying subtle patterns of movement or shape that might otherwise go unnoticed. This technology has already revealed previously undocumented behaviors in deep-sea jellyfish, tracked the migrations of transparent crustaceans, and located dense aggregations of organisms that hint at new ecological interactions. Mapping technology has advanced as well. Multi-beam sonar systems, which emit thousands of sound pulses in a fan-shaped pattern, now provide detailed three-dimensional images of the seafloor. Combined with backscatter analysis, which examines how those sound waves reflect off different materials, scientists can infer habitat types and even predict the presence of certain biological communities without setting foot on the seafloor. These tools have revealed hidden coral gardens thriving on underwater mountains, vast cold seep fields supporting strange methane-eating organisms, and labyrinthine networks of submarine canyons that funnel nutrients through the deep. Positioning technology has also evolved. Long baseline acoustic navigation networks now allow precise tracking of vehicles even in the deepest Hadal trenches, enabling kilometer-scale transects at depths once considered unreachable. With this capability, scientists can systematically map regions of the ocean floor that were previously accessible only in scattered glimpses. The result is a shift from isolated discoveries to comprehensive surveys, from curiosity driven snapshots to a detailed census of deep sea life and geology. These advances are complemented by remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, which remain indispensable for close up observation and sampling. Controlled by pilots aboard research vessels, ROVs can hover over fragile hydrothermal vents, use robotic manipulators to collect specimens, and record high definition video of elusive animals. They have allowed scientists to observe rare interactions, such as deep sea fish hunting in coordinated groups, or delicate gelatinous predators capturing prey with nearly invisible filaments that would have been impossible to witness even a decade ago. Crude submersibles still play a vital role too, especially in capturing the nuances of behavior and habitat that machines might miss. Scientists inside these pressurized spheres have watched octopuses brood over their eggs for years, have followed swarms of crustaceans clustering around methane seeps, and have witnessed organisms building entire ecosystems on chemical energy rather than sunlight. Direct observation provides context that no sensor can fully replicate, grounding data in first-hand experience. The picture emerging from these technologies is not simply one of new species, but of new ecosystems and biological strategies. Researchers have discovered vast microbial mats thriving on volcanic rocks, filter feeders anchored to deep sea currents that flow like invisible rivers, and immense aggregations of jellyfish and siphonophores drifting for miles in coordinated formations. Some of these discoveries are reshaping how scientists understand evolution and adaptation, suggesting that life's capacity for innovation extends far beyond what surface ecosystems reveal. Each technological leap also opens the door to more ambitious questions. Could there be giant predators, unknown to science, that hunt in trenches deeper than any human has yet reached? Might entire communities exist around chemical seeps or tectonic fissures still uncharted by sonar? Could life forms based on unfamiliar biochemical pathways thrive in extreme conditions we once thought uninhabitable? The answers will come slowly, in data streams from autonomous vehicles, in images captured by midwater cameras, and in specimens lifted from the abyss. But for the first time, we are beginning to explore the deep ocean with the persistence and precision once reserved for planetary missions. What was once guessed at through stories and speculation is becoming visible, measurable, and real. The deep sea is no longer beyond our reach. It is a frontier opening before us, not with grand gestures, but with steady progress, kilometer by kilometer, sample by sample, image by image. As our machines grow more capable and our questions more precise, we are drawing closer to meeting the monsters that have eluded us for so long, and perhaps to discovering that reality, once again, is stranger than the myths that first imagined it. For as long as people have stood on the shore and watched the tides roll in and out, we have seen far more than water. In the ocean's vast horizons and unfathomable depths, we have glimpsed our own nature reflected back at us, our fears, our ambitions, our curiosity, and our longing to bring order to what lies beyond our control. The sea has always been a canvas onto which humanity paints its deepest questions, and the monsters we imagine within it are not only reflections of the ocean's power, but of the human mind itself. From the very beginning of exploration, the sea has stood as the ultimate symbol of what cannot be tamed. It feeds us, connects continents, and offers routes into new worlds. Yet it also destroys ships without warning, swallows coastlines beneath storm surge, and hides its secrets beneath thousands of feet of crushing water. It is indifferent to our presence and impervious to our plans. In that tension between reliance and vulnerability, myths were born. They gave shape to the sea's moods and intentions, transforming natural forces into beings that could be named, feared, and, perhaps, understood. Across cultures, these beings embodied different aspects of the ocean's personality. In Norse myth, the serpent Jormungandr lay coiled beneath the waves, so immense that it encircled the entire world, stirring storms whenever it moved. In Greek tradition, the monstrous whirlpool Charybdis threatened to swallow fleets whole, a personification of the sea's sudden, devouring violence. Polynesian legends spoke of Taniwha, mighty guardians and punishers of those who dared disrespect their waters. These figures were not merely stories about creatures, they were attempts to give meaning to a force that could not be reasoned with, to clothe the shapelessness of nature in a form the human imagination could grasp. Beneath these stories lies one of humanity's oldest anxieties, the fear of chaos. To live close to the sea was to live with constant uncertainty. Calm waters could turn deadly in moments. Entire coastlines could disappear overnight beneath towering waves. Ships could leave the safety of the harbor and never return, with no explanation for their disappearance. A monster bursting from the deep was a vivid metaphor, but beneath it was a deeper truth that human life was always one storm, one hidden reef, one rogue wave away from ruin. Yet the monsters born of this fear were more than warnings. They were also magnets for the imagination. Humans are drawn to the unknown as much as we are wary of it. Even when the edges of maps were filled with snarling serpents and gaping maws, ships still set sail toward those very margins. In that way, myths served a dual purpose. They held us back and they pulled us forward. A map's curled serpent kept sailors at bay, yet also pulled them toward the blank margin. The terrifying stories that warned us of danger also sparked the desire to confront it, to know what lay beyond the line where certainty ended. This paradox, the simultaneous urge to retreat and to explore, reveals something essential about the human mind. We are storytellers by nature, and we use stories to wrestle with forces larger than ourselves. The monsters we imagine rising from the deep are not only embodiments of danger, they are projections of our own relationship with uncertainty. They allow us to frame the unknown, to give it a shape and a name so that we can look it in the eye. They are also expressions of our attempts to exert control. A whirlpool is terrifying because it is blind and indifferent. But Charybdis, the mythical beast, has intention. It is something that might be appeased, reasoned with, or outwitted. By turning chaos into a character, humanity creates the illusion of agency, a sense that we might have some say in the outcome, even if that is only through caution, ritual, or respect. In many ways, the myths we inherit from the past still echo in the way we approach the unknown today. Even with sonar scanning the seafloor and submersibles plunging to crushing depths, the language we use remains saturated with metaphor. Scientists name hydrothermal vent fields after underworld gods. Unmapped trenches are described as abysses. And when new alien-looking creatures emerge from the dark, headlines still call them monsters. We know the kraken is a squid and that whirlpools are shaped by current, but we keep speaking the language of myth because it reflects something deeper than fact. It captures the feeling of standing before something vast and unknowable. Sea monsters, in this light, are not relics of an ignorant past. They are enduring symbols of how we grapple with mystery. They mark the boundaries between what we know and what we cannot yet explain. They embody the push and pull within us, the instinct to fear the deep and the urge to venture into it anyway. When we read the old stories of serpents and leviathans, we are not just reading about imaginary beasts, we are reading about the human condition itself, our vulnerability before nature, our insatiable curiosity, and our stubborn determination to seek meaning even where none is guaranteed. And so, the monsters we place in the sea remain with us, not because we believe they are real, but because they continue to express truths about who we are. They remind us that beneath the surface of every fear lies a question, and behind every question lies the will to explore. In the darkness beyond the known world, those ancient shapes still move not in the water, but in the depths of the human imagination, guiding us forward into the mysteries that await. The deeper we descend, the more the ocean seems to resist our questions. Every probe, every camera, every carefully planned expedition ends the same way with more mysteries than it began. Even with our most advanced technologies, the sea still withholds its answers, holding its stories in layers of darkness and pressure that human eyes have scarcely glimpsed. And that is why, after centuries of searching, we continue to return to it. It is not simply that we do not know what is down there, it is that the questions themselves are getting bigger. One of the most persistent questions scientists still grapple with is how far the trend of deep sea gigantism might go. We know, as the physics of size suggests, that the conditions of the deep ocean encourage life to grow larger than its shallow water relatives. High pressure, cold temperatures, slow metabolisms, and scarcity driven competition all combine to reward creatures that can travel far, store energy efficiently, and exploit sparse resources. Yet, for all the examples we have cataloged, we still do not know whether there is an upper limit to this evolutionary path. Could there be animals larger, more powerful, or more ancient than anything we have ever observed, their existence hidden simply because we have not yet looked in the right place? The sheer size of the unexplored ocean keeps that possibility alive. Entire biomes remain unvisited. Even the most ambitious expeditions, with fleets of robotic submersibles and months-long missions, have mapped only a tiny fraction of the seafloor and peered into only the thinnest slice of the water column. The Hadal trenches the deepest parts of the ocean, where pressure exceeds 1,000 times, that at the surface are visited so rarely that each descent reveals life forms unlike anything known before. If evolution has pushed size to its extremes anywhere, it is likely in these crushing, lightless depths, where competition follows rules we barely understand. A second question, one that haunts oceanographers and evolutionary biologists alike, is whether the past might still exist in the present, hidden far from our reach. The fossil record tells us that Earth's oceans were once filled with predators that would dwarf even today's largest sharks. There were lamniform sharks nearly as long as buses, giant marine reptiles that hunted in shallow seas, and toothed whales that preyed on other whales. Most are gone, but the ocean is a place where extinction can unfold slowly. It is stable, insulated from many of the environmental pressures that drive rapid change on land. That stability leaves open the possibility, however slim, that some lineages may have persisted unnoticed, their populations small, their ranges remote, their presence masked by the vastness of their habitat. Ancient myths, in this context, take on a different weight. Stories of enormous shapes, rising from the water or swallowing ships, whole might not be exaggerations at all, but distant cultural memories of encounters with species that no longer exist. Humans once walked beside mammoths and watched saber-toothed cats hunt across the plains. It is conceivable that early mariners saw marine giants in their final days and recorded those encounters in oral traditions. Even now, fragments of those stories echo in our languages and folklore, faint signals from a time when the oceans held creatures we have yet to rediscover. A third question cuts even deeper into the ecology of the abyss. How does energy move through the deep ocean? And could there be entire feeding strategies we have not yet observed? Scientists have begun to speculate about hodl carbon bottlenecks, points in the deep sea food web where energy accumulates in ways we do not fully understand. If such bottlenecks exist, they could support forms of life we have never sampled, perhaps large, slow moving filter feeders that graze on suspended organic particles in the Hadal water column, too sparse or too subtle to register in our current surveys. These organisms might not resemble the predators we imagine, but could still represent giants of a different kind, evolving to exploit a niche we have not yet detected. Each of these questions leads to still more. What role do unknown organisms play in global nutrient cycles? Are their ecosystems built on chemical processes entirely separate from photosynthesis or hydrothermal vent energy? Could some species have evolved in isolation for tens of millions of years, their biology so distinct that they would redefine what we think life can be? We cannot answer any of these questions yet, but every time we return from the deep, the evidence suggests that the ocean holds far more complexity than we have imagined. The discoveries already made hint at what might still await us: fish with transparent heads that look upward through domes of glassy tissue, amphipods that live in pressure so intense it would crush a submarine, jellyfish with tendrils longer than the largest whales. Each was unknown until technology finally caught up with the ocean's depth and darkness. And each reminds us that the strangest, most extraordinary creatures are often the ones that remain hidden longest. Somewhere below, in water so deep that sunlight will never touch it, the answers to these questions are already written. They exist in the movements of unseen giants, in the chemical signatures of undiscovered food webs, in the faint traces of evolution's most secret experiments. We are only just beginning to learn how to look for them, and as our instruments improve, the questions that have haunted generations of explorers may one day lead us straight to the heart of the ocean's last great mysteries. For as long as humans have stood on the shore and stared into the horizon, the sea has been a place where knowledge ends and wonder begins. Its tides have carried our ships, our stories, and our questions across generations. Its surface may seem familiar, but beneath it lies a world that has shaped every chapter of Earth's history, a realm that still holds more mysteries than answers. The deeper we explore, the more we realize that the ocean is not just part of our planet, it is part of our story. Many of the oldest tales humanity ever told were born from encounters with this hidden world. Sailors spoke of serpents coiled around their ships and tentacled monsters rising from fathomless depths. What they saw, or thought they saw, was often distorted by fear, distance, and imagination. But their stories were not inventions plucked from nowhere. They were attempts to describe something vast and beyond comprehension: a squid breaching for only a heartbeat, a whale surfacing in the night, the glint of an unfamiliar creature just below the waterline. As centuries passed, these moments became legends, and those legends, in turn, guided our curiosity deeper. The sea itself is far more than a backdrop for those stories. It is a living, shifting archive, preserving everything that life has ever been. In its sediment lie the skeletons of creatures that once ruled the waves and the microscopic shells of organisms that changed the planet's climate. Its chemistry still carries the fingerprints of volcanic eruptions and asteroid impacts from hundreds of millions of years ago. Even the water itself is a historical record, circulating nutrients and minerals through cycles that stretch back to the earliest stirrings of life. To study the ocean is to read a biography written over 4 billion years, one that is still being written now. And yet, for all we have learned, most of this biography remains sealed. We have sent machines to the edges of the solar system, yet there are mountain ranges beneath the Pacific that no camera has ever filmed. We have charted the surfaces of distant moons, yet there are deep sea plains larger than continents that remain entirely unmapped. Whenever a submersible descends into the abyss, it almost always finds something no one has ever seen before: a jellyfish that glows like molten glass, a fish with translucent skin and eyes that peer upward through a dome of bone, a coral forest so ancient that it has been growing since before our species existed. Even in places close to home, the surprises continue. Coastal reefs hide animals so strange they force scientists to rewrite evolutionary lineages. New species of sharks and cephalopods are described every year, some of them previously known only from fossil records. The ocean is not a static catalog of life, but a restless experiment in adaptation, constantly generating new forms and strategies for survival. It is easy to think that myths belong to the past, but in many ways, they still guide us. They remind us that discovery often begins with imagination, with daring to ask whether the impossible might, in fact, be real. When early naturalists set out to investigate reports of monstrous squid, they were chasing a legend, and they found a living giant. When paleontologists studied fossilized bones once thought to be dragon remains, they uncovered evidence of species that vanished millions of years ago. Even now, whispers of strange sounds from the deep or unexplained scars on whales push research into unexplored directions. Curiosity and story remain entwined, as they always have been. There is a humbling lesson in all of this. Despite centuries of exploration, the sea continues to evade complete understanding. It is too vast, too ancient, and too dynamic to ever yield all its secrets at once. It hides its history in trenches deeper than mountains are tall, buries its fossils beneath miles of silt, and shelters life in forms so alien that we are only beginning to grasp their existence. The more we learn, the clearer it becomes that our knowledge is only a single tide in a much larger ocean. Somewhere below, perhaps in a canyon where no light has ever fallen, a species older than our civilizations may still be thriving. Somewhere on a continental slope, a fossilized jaw may be waiting to change our understanding of evolution. Somewhere in a hidden current, a chemical signature could reveal how life began or where it might appear again. These possibilities are not fantasies, they are the next pages of a story that remains unwritten. And so the sea continues to call us back. It calls through unanswered questions, through fleeting glimpses of the unknown, through the echo of myths that still stir our curiosity. It promises that for every mystery solved, another lies just beyond reach. And in that promise, it reminds us that discovery is not an endpoint, but a journey. Somewhere out there, in the darkness beneath the waves, a silent ribbon of bioluminescent light drifts through black water. A page of history lies sealed in silt, and a scar on an ancient whale's flank hints at a life we have yet to meet. The ocean has not finished revealing itself, and perhaps it never will.